Chapter 10:15. Amidst the hot and humid air, countless gemstone crystals that were almost piled up into a mountain reflected a colorful light. Every facet of the crystal reflected a huge figure. Under the dazzling light of the fire, dozens of wriggling silhouettes were entangled behind the curtain. Scorching acid kept dripping from the edge of the golden bed, making sizzling sounds. When the clamorous cries and groans came to an end, a bloated and fat figure appeared from behind the tattered curtain. He casually wiped the sweat off his body. He looked down the stairs. Hades lowered his eyes and calmly waited for a response. "You mean, why sure? I've never heard of him." The leader of the group, Zim, who ruled the Thunder White Plains, rubbed his chin and thought about the news brought by the jester. "Forget it. It doesn't matter. Since you said you want to care, I'll help you keep an eye on him." "Thank you very much." Hades bowed his head and thanked him. "Don't be shy. Since you're an honorable guest, you should treat this place like your own home." The leader of the group grinned and patted his belly as he laughed. "How about it? Is there anything in my collection that you like? If there's anything you like, you can take it with you. They're all good at serving people." Ha ha! Behind the leader of the group, there was a burst of laughter. However, the laughter was a little too frightening. The mutated monsters nestled around the leader of the group, swinging their grotesque limbs and making scolding noises. The leader of the group laughed louder and louder, shaking the treasures that were piled up like a mountain. Hades's eyes twitched slightly. He seriously thought for a long time about what kind of humiliation or generous gift this was. His enthusiastic smile stiffened. "I don't dare to covet your love, sir. I don't have that kind of desire. You Piper's followers are really strange," Yizichin said with a smile. Zima shook his head, carelessly grabbed the blood-red fruit from the plate, and threw it into his own mouth. "In comparison, I, God Bushuan, have a much simpler and more straightforward teaching. Instead of talking nonsense, why don't you just enjoy the moment and throw yourself into the boundless happiness? Forget it. You can leave now. You can tell my subordinates about the small matters later." This bunch of idiots who shot their brains out as if they were liquid really didn't have any brains at all. Even now, they still didn't understand how serious the consequences were. Hades's eyes flashed with gloominess for a moment, but he didn't do anything in the end. Maintaining his composure, he turned around and left. The door slammed shut, but the chewing sound of the golden bed did not stop. Zim hugged his beautiful wives and concubines while the hands on his shoulders grabbed the fruits that were delivered to him like flowing water. He asked vaguely, "What do you think?" "You can't trust me." The warrior covered in the bullhead armor said in a muffled voice, "Those guys who hide their heads and show their tails always have other plans." "Then let him be, but keep a close eye on him. Don't give him a chance to make a fuss." Zim wiped the residue from the corner of his mouth and shook his head mockingly. "A reality realm person? Ha! Today it's a reality realm person. Tomorrow it might be a lost person in their army. Most likely they want to use it as a means to lower the price." The bullhead warrior nodded. "If that's the case, do you still want to capture Huaishur?" "Capture? Of course we have to capture." Zim sucked the pulp on his fingers and grinned. Countless sharp teeth glowed, happily. "Not only do we have to capture, but we also have to capture carefully and seriously, whether it's dead, alive, or something else. As long as someone wants it, it's a treasure." 4 pairs of eyes glowed with greed. "Hee, a rare commodity worth hoarding." In the gloomy sky, the sound of thunder that sounded like an iron curtain cracking constantly echoed. Under the illumination of the flashing lightning, the earth was pale, as if it was paved with ashes of bones. The long darkness and the explosive flashes of thunder set the tone of this hell. The hot and dry wind kept blowing from afar. Accompanied by the roar of the volcano, molten iron flowed in the river like lava, bringing constant light to this dim world. Other than that, there were plantations densely packed on the barren land. Behind the barriers of those foreign species, countless stooped figures staggered among the hellish crops. They staggered forward, and occasionally, after falling to the ground, they could no longer get up and were completely devoured by the bloodthirsty plants. In the long sleep, Raymond sneezed and woke up from the nightmare of being dismembered after being exposed. He raised his eyes and saw a strange face in front of him. 2 scarlet eyeballs rolled around, and the corners of the mouth on the face that resembled a dog's, head curled up, the classic black and white color scheme, and the grin was full of evil charm and wildness. At the same time, it revealed the 2 vegetable leaves on its front teeth. "Do I look like a human to you?" It pinched its chin and suddenly asked. Raymond rolled his eyes. "Don't worry, you don't look like one at all. From the beginning to the end, there's no human at all. You haven't done anything related to humans. Tell me, how do you look like a human?" That proves that the disguise is very successful. Huaishur grinned and laughed with its tongue sticking out. "No, you're not disguising. You're showing your true form." Raymond wanted to say so, but the 2 of them were too close. If Huaishur wanted to hit him, he really couldn't beat it. Moreover, he was no longer a human now. He raised his hand and touched the horns on his head, and his face that was already very different from the past. He had to admit that he had become a Tauren. Celestial genealogy itself had excellent adaptability to hell. The Eternal Road's sublimators also had extremely high resistance to the influence of hell's precipitation and erosion brought about by the depth of hell. If there was a progress bar for distortion and solidification, then the progress bar for ordinary sublimators would be 100, and there might be distortion at 60. Then the progress bar for celestial genealogy would be at least 150. As for Huaishur, it was estimated that if he was thrown into the pot of the champion chef and stewed for decades, there might be some symptoms of solidification. Because of this, they could so smoothly disguise themselves as hellish creatures. Due to the influence of his own chariot of destiny, after going through Gregory's secret ritual, Raymond would naturally move closer to the divine bull pulling the chariot. As for Huaishur, why he became a Tauren was really an unsolved mystery. Now, only the 2 of them could show their faces in public, and the other 3 were all hiding in the car. Since they pursued the principle of thrill, they would follow through to the end. Even the truck couldn't escape Huaishur's evil hands. Under the transformation of Anton and Huaishur, the 10 pairs of tires disappeared and were replaced by 16 strange blood-soaked feet. The armor was completely covered with a skin membrane, and after a large number of hell plants were implanted, clusters of strange blood-red flowers grew. The steel body shrank and deformed, no longer having the square outline of the past. It became grotesquely shaped, and the red dragon's big mouth was exposed on the front of the car, which was incomparably ferocious. Although they looked strange, in the infernal realm, strange shapes were the norm. If it didn't look strange, everyone would be embarrassed to go out and meet people. Only the red dragon was still crying. "This is too much. The car paint I just painted. Woo, I can't go back. The outside has become someone else's shape. I can't go back." Huaishur was silent for a long time and looked at Raymond with an extremely strange gaze. "What the hell do you usually show it? Is this my fault?" Raymond was furious. "Go back and ask your crow what it brings every time it hitchhikes. Each taste is heavier than the other. How can a pure lover like me, who blushes when we hold hands, stand this kind of stimulation?" His grief and indignation were overflowing, and he was crying blood with every word. However, when he said this, he was wearing a bull's head, so it was particularly unconvincing. Raymond, 32 years old, unmarried, single, old driver. So far, no girlfriend. It's not easy for you either. Huaisher patted him on the shoulder sympathetically. Forget it. We're both single dogs. Why do we have to hurt each other? Please shut up. Raymond's blood pressure was full, and he didn't want to talk. What's the hurry? There's still a while before we reach Taiyan City. It's such a long journey. Let's chat. Shut up, I don't want to chat. I want to sleep. Raymond put on his mask again and lay on the roof of the Red Dragon, not wanting to talk anymore. 19 depths. Thunder, White Plains, the Deep Zone, was also a place where many hells intersected. With the arrival of the deep tide, more and more hells bordered this desert, followed by more hells. And even more wealth. The arrival of the War of the Worlds also made its status more important. Bushiyuan's power was deeply rooted here. Revelry and greedy plundering never stopped, and the core of this hell was Taiyan City, which stood under the volcano. According to the records in the Astronomy Association's database, there were a total of 4 hells guarding this place. They were the Minotaur's shield guards, the Frostbone settlement from the permafrost, the large group of Spinosaurus, and the local overlord, the molten demonic dragon. Other than the ash-like soil being suitable for growing special crops, the most famous product here was weapons. After the molten iron flowing out of the volcano was continuously forged day and night, it would soon be sent to the hands of the various rulers through various channels. In the approaching War of the Worlds, it had become an important transit hub and a market for various parties to exchange resources. The ruler here was the one blessed by Bushiyuan, Zim. At the same time, he was also the leader of the molten demonic dragon group. It was because of the countless giant worm-like molten demonic dragons drilling day and night in the volcano that there was an endless supply of hell iron. Even from a distance, one could feel the tremors of the earth. It was as if there was a huge monster moving under the earth's crust. A low, muffled sound passed by, and the ground cracked inexplicably, and dust rose into the air. The closer they got to the city surrounded by lava under the volcano, the stiffer Raymond's expression became. Nervous. Even the mercenaries of the Eye of Nightmare had always been fighting and killing. They had never had such an experience of swaggering and delivering food to their door. In the sky, more and more small Spinosaurus were wandering around, looking down coldly. From time to time, they swooped down and picked up the pitiful worms on the road. Soon, amidst the tragic cries, there would be a faint rain of blood mixed with corpse pieces sprinkling down. It was unknown whether it was because Huaisher's dog head was too delicious or because it looked like a soft persimmon. More and more Spinosaurus gathered, but they were afraid of the red dragon's big mouth and were not willing to test it easily. They followed them all the way to the huge checkpoint before entering the city. Among the long queue and countless strange-looking vehicles and riding creatures, the red dragon's body was not considered outstanding. Among the strange-looking hell creatures in front and behind them, the 2 of them looked cute. Many times, it was too much to expect the large groups of hell to get along harmoniously with each other and follow the order. Most of the time, it was pure violence and deterrence that maintained the stability of the city. Of course, the first thing to do was to give those who entered the city a show of strength. Under the aim of countless arrows and cannons on the city wall, the minotaurs with the bull's head looked down coldly. They did not have any warmth because of a fellow villager. A cold light fell from the giant mirror hanging on the wall and swept past them. It did not see through their disguise. However, before Raymond could heave a sigh of relief, a pale mist floated toward them. In the cold and icy mist, the frostbone spirit raised its red eyes and asked indifferently, "Name?" "Russell." The kobold on the red dragon's head opened its mouth and answered without thinking. Chapter 10:16. Russell. Frostbone's red moo seemed to pause for a moment, as if he was frowning. What a strange name. Right. The kobold swung his tongue, and stammered, Many people told me that this name sounds like an old bastard." Frostbone casually registered it and asked coldly, "Where did you get it from?" I, I just came back from the boundless sea. I went back to my hometown to restock on some goods. Sir, do you want some? Our goods taste the best, the most powerful." As he spoke, the kobold turned around and pulled out a wriggling vine from the back of the carriage. He took a bite out of it, and the vine struggled as if it was alive. It let out an ear-piercing shriek as juice spurted out. A sweet smell filled the air. On the city wall, a few of the Minotaur's noses twitched, and their gazes became greedy. Come, come, come. Everyone has a share. It's all for you. My carriage doesn't have any pure love at all. It's all evil. Hey, keep it well. Is one basket enough? Give me another basket. How can this be enough? Cough, cough, eat. The kobold opened the back of the carriage, allowing the excited Minotaurs to take away the 10 or so baskets of the most delicious goods. Everyone had a share. When he saw their satisfied expressions, he was actually smiling even more happily than they were. Frostbone glanced at him coldly, thinking to himself, is he an idiot? However, after taking care of the Minotaur, the kobold actually leaned over and bumped into Frostbone with his shoulder, as if he had accidentally bumped into him. Frostbone's chill grew even stronger. Just as he was about to teach this guy a lesson, he felt something hard and smooth shove into his body. Origin Substance Crystal. Sir, please do me a favor and be magnanimous. The kobold acted as if nothing had happened and continued to smile obsequiously. Frostbone glanced at him, then glanced at the almost empty back of the carriage, as well as the few baskets that could be faintly seen. He seemed to understand something. Coldness. You want to bribe me? What are you talking about? You and I hit it off at first sight. How can it be a bribe to be friends? The kobold flicked its tongue and shook its head. It stuffed another origin substance crystal into its mouth and said in a low voice, When we leave the city, I'll need your help. Frostbone weighed the origin form crystal in his hand, a satisfied expression flashing across his red eyes. You know the rules well. It changed the topic and its tone became stern. Why haven't I seen you before? Raymond's heart tightened, but Huaisher's smile didn't change. He took out a bag of seeds from his bag and stuffed it into Raymond's hands. I'm new to the road, and it's my first time driving. I'm relying on the guidance of all of you. If there's anything I'm not doing well, please give me some pointers. When you enter the city and go to the market, don't forget to report my name. Frostbone said something in a low voice, then waved his hand at the top of the city wall, signaling his subordinates behind him to open the checkpoint and let them in. It's over just like that. When Huaisher returned to the car, Raymond was in disbelief. How had they suddenly become, like, family? What else could it be? You think it's an astronomy club? Huaisher chuckled softly. It was no joke to expect the military discipline of the infernal realm to be strict, especially since this was a hub for trade. Although it looked strict, it was actually like a sieve. Huaisher had 100,000 ways to swagger his way in, especially when they had the skin of a smuggler under the shell of a traveling merchant. However, even Huaisher hadn't expected that he would be able to establish a relationship with these illegal businesses so easily. As for whether or not he would be caught by these people as a result of his performance, that would depend on when the time came. At worst, he would just change his skin. He would go in and investigate the situation first. Just as Huaisher was deep in thought, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. Wait! The checkpoint that had been moved stopped in place. Someone had brought a few Minotaurs over. Raymond's body stiffened. He subconsciously reached out to his side, but Huaisher grabbed his wrist. The kobold turned around with a smile. Hey, what's the matter, guys? Frostbone glanced at the two of them coldly. It had accepted the illegal money so quickly that it almost forgot about the proper business. Have you seen this person before? It projected a handsome face in front of the two of them. A very rampant thief. Recently, the city lord has put a bounty on him. Raymond's neck stiffened. He restrained his urge to look at Huaishur. And no, at this time, Huaishur still hadn't forgotten his stuttering persona. He shook his head contemptuously. I've never remembered anyone who's as good-looking as me. Moreover, he looks strange. He doesn't look like a good thing at first glance. Frostbone's red pupils trembled, as if it was twitching. With your looks, you still have the nerve to complain that others are ugly? All right, let's go. He waved his hand coldly and glanced at Huaishur. You'd better not lie. Otherwise, the consequences will be serious. All right, don't worry. The kobold smiled flatteringly. If I catch him, I'll definitely send him to you. But Iron Flame City is so heavily guarded. I don't think that guy would dare to come. Frostbone nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a piercing scream. He's already here. In a cage hanging under the city wall, a white-haired man with the body of a snake and a head full of white hair had blood-red eyes. He grabbed the railing and shouted down with a hoarse voice, I saw it. I see it. It's here, destruction and death. Idiots, you're seeking your own deaths. The earth is cracking, flames are rising, all the stars are extinguishing. The terrifying darkness that swallows everything is about to descend. The crazy snake monster was drooling. It struggled madly in the cage and screamed, attracting many people's attention. The kobold was stunned. Ignore it. It's the 6th time this month that it's gone crazy. Frostbone glanced at the snake monster with disdain. In the past, it could be considered a reliable diviner. Now, every time a ruler passes by, it screams like a goblin whose toes have been stepped on. It must have taken too many drugs. Huaishur nodded in agreement. I've seen a lot of people like this. He flicked his finger and looked away. Soon, the strange vehicle merged into the monsters in the city and disappeared. Only a small strain of bacteria floated in the wind. Soon, it landed at the edge of the cage and drilled into the festering abscesses. Half an hour later, in the high heat, the snake monster's brain turned into a pile of paste. It smiled foolishly and drooled. It no longer screamed. I see it. I see it. It muttered to itself. Destruction has arrived. Although it was called a city, it was actually just a village with a huge fortress. As for hoping that there would be any residents, it was completely a dream. There had never been such a ruling structure in hell, and there was no such thing as civilians. At the bottom of everything were tools. Forging tools, production tools, farming tools, trading tools, slaves. In addition to the large group of people loyal to the city lord, there were only outsiders, managers, and all kinds of strange existences. Although Raymond had participated in many wars between hell, it was the first time he saw such a huge factory in hell. It was right in the center of the city, occupying 1/3 of the huge area. Hot molten iron rushed out slowly from the volcano, mixed with magma. It flowed through the channels into the huge factory. The sound of forging was endless. The concentration of the molten iron in hell was frightening. Even hell's creatures could not stand it. Anyone who worked here would be deformed into a pile of rotten meat in less than half a month. They would be thrown directly into the molten iron as a source of raw materials and resentment, becoming a part of countless weapons. The controller, the supervisor, and the producer formed a perfect and healthy cycle of hell. It was breathtaking. This is really a big guy. Suddenly, Raymond heard a soft sigh beside him. When he turned his head, he found that the kobold was grinning and flicking his tongue as if he was smiling. He was staring at the huge factory, but His eyes were flashing with a dangerous light that made people feel uneasy. Greed surged. Redmond shuddered as he felt a sense of foreboding. Where are we going next? Let's go to the market first. Huaishur patted the red dragon's head and looked back at the container behind him. Since we're here and we brought so many things, find a few spendthrifts and let's sell the goods. Which little cutie would get his gift? Huaishur was looking forward to it. Have all the places been notified? We're sending people there. What about the Eye of Truth? Be careful of their disguises. We're working hard on it, the Minotaur said solemnly. We're working on it, we're working on it. His tone when he promised could be said to be impassioned. However, Hades's expression was still as cold as ice. It was probably wishful thinking to expect these guys to take it seriously before they personally experienced the danger of Huaishur. Even if Huaishur really might come here, they would probably be too lazy to react. Even if they did take action now, they would probably think that it was a rare commodity and wanted to make a big profit. No matter how he looked at it, it was not reliable. However, due to Zim's vigilance, he could not mobilize more forces to enter the Thunder White Plains. This made Hades particularly irritated. Especially today, the signs of hatred were becoming more and more obvious. Huaishur, that daring be *starred, might have already come to this hell. Exaggeratedly, she might have already entered Iron Flame's city. Zhang Tai thought. He walked in the market expressionlessly. Suddenly, his footsteps paused as he felt a faint malice coming from afar. Under his robe, his knuckles flicked, and the tattooed runes on his knuckles closed together. In an instant, a squirming monster in the market exploded out of thin air, and blood splattered everywhere. Not only it, but even the entire stall had instantly evaporated in the explosion of blood. After realizing that the person who did it was Hades, the manager did not dare to step forward to denounce him. Hades glanced at it coldly, only to find that it was only an audacious idiot who had died. Not only did the irritation in his heart not dissipate, but it became even stronger. But soon he began to reflect and calm down. He was about to be oversensitive because of Huaishur. He should not be so paranoid. However, for some reason, his line of sight suddenly paused. It landed on the stall next to him, behind a pile of withered grass and all sorts of weird things. The hateful kobold, with its tongue hanging out and saliva dripping from its mouth, was looking up at him. After a brief exchange of glances, it suddenly smiled strangely. "Dear customer, would you like to buy something nice?" Chapter 1017. F***CK, what are you doing? When Hades approached, Raymond was completely stunned. In the deepest part of the carriage, Forster, who was pretending to be asleep, was not the only one who was holding his double-barreled shotgun. Gregory was also screaming in pain. His blood pressure was at full capacity. Damn it, why did you have to provoke him for no reason? The aggro indicator was already too close to him, and the secret ritual could no longer be maintained. If Hedi decided to use it to target him, he had no confidence in stopping her. If it were not for the fact that Huaishur had planted a lot of clones and seeds underground to create a lot of misleading effects, he would have been exposed the moment he entered the city. In front of the stall, the gloomy abyss jester sized up the giggling kobold. He felt like he had seen him somewhere before. But all kobolds in the world seemed to look the same. It was impossible to tell who was who. He asked coldly, "What are you selling here?" Take a look, take a look." Huaishur wagged his tail, saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. He cupped his hands at the stall in front of him and said, "These are all rare and good things. They are most suitable for a powerful person like you who has a unique taste." Their mouths were about to brag about the items on the stalls to the heavens, but in fact, Any creature with a little bit of experience could tell that the things on the tattered felt were a pile of junk. The only thing worth mentioning was a pile of rusted rings and jewelry. There were curses hidden in them, and it seemed like the kobold had dug them out from some grave. In Hades's vision, the evil aura had already wrapped around the kobold, but he was still giggling, unaware that he was about to die. Seeing that Hades did not say anything, the kobold suddenly started to promote his products enthusiastically. He pulled out a few bright red flowers from a bunch of messy plant roots and held them up with both hands. Look at this. This is a rotten tail flower, specially for the front line. It's a rare top-quality product. It was clearly a flower that looked incomparably fresh, but it emitted a rotten stench that made people cover their noses. In fact, in some places, this thing was completely grown all over the mountains and plains. It was trash that no one would want even if they were offered money. However, to the rat men who were like cannon fodder everywhere, this thing was a powerful hallucinogen and stimulant. Once they came into contact with it, they would not be able to get rid of it. The only drawback was that one's brain would be damaged if they took too much. Even if they were facing their natural enemy, they would still dare to charge forward. But for the rulers, this was actually a bonus. If you eat it, your tail will rot easily. The kobold took a bite and chewed for a long time before spitting it on the ground. The tail is rotten, and the head is rotten too. In short, it was rotten. Very, very good. It was afraid that Hades would not like it. So after it finished introducing the first item, it grabbed another piece of rotten wood. Look at this one. This one. It's an 800-year-old tree with broken roots. With such a thick size, it's hard to find it anywhere else. Hades was indifferent. Similarly, worthless trash had no other use other than being used as a material for low-quality poisons. Then this one. The kobold grabbed another handful of pale, withered grass and introduced it enthusiastically. This is a rare single-stalk grass. It's convenient, cheap, and affordable. I also have weak-stalk grass, year-stalk grass. Take a small bite, relax your body and soul, and delight your soul. As it moved under the tattered felt mat on the ground, a bunch of densely packed hellish white ladles crawled out and crawled everywhere. Some crawled onto the kobold's body, and it casually picked them up and threw them into its mouth, chewing loudly. These are all good things. It smiled obsequiously and rubbed its hands. You can choose as much as you want. Today is the first day of business, so I'll give you a 10% discount. Hades did not say anything. He was already beginning to regret wasting time on this kind of trash kobold. But just as he turned around and was about to leave, something in the corner of the stall attracted his attention. It was a tattered wooden plate used to store trash. It also had no redeeming qualities, but the patterns on it made him feel a little absent-minded and disappointed for a moment. Some parts of it were very similar to the decoration style of Helios. Although they were not of the same type, it made him involuntarily recall some memories of the past. At that moment, Raymond saw that among the hellish white ladles crawling all over the ground, there was a gray metal worm. Like a speck of dust, it quietly attached itself to Hades's robe. It quietly crawled up, and bit by bit, it landed on Hades's wrist. The kobold was still smiling foolishly, as if nothing had happened. Hades froze for a moment, instinctively feeling uneasy. He looked around suspiciously. Raymond's heart was already in his throat, and he held his breath. Just as Hedi was frowning and carefully sensing the surroundings, she suddenly heard a sharp voice that was close by. Beep. What's that sound? He abruptly raised his head, and his sharp gaze looked behind the stall, causing the kobold to tremble. It almost lost its grip on the item in its hand. It was a metal box that seemed to be some kind of strange detector. There was a thick antenna on it, which had long been disassembled and put back together. It was still emitting sparks and smoke. "What's that in your hand?" Hades asked coldly. This," the kobold replied innocently. "This is something I received from the front line. I heard it's called Virgin Identification Machine." It raised both its hands as if it was holding an incredible treasure. All that was left was a holy light shining down from the sky. What was that? Not only Hades, but even Raymond and the 3 people hiding in the carriage were dumbfounded. The kobold happily fiddled with the machine and proudly said, This is not for sale. It's a treasure. What virgin? It's accurate with one test. It's just that there's been some problems recently, and it keeps beeping." As he spoke, he pointed the box at the scared Tauren. Beep. The machine let out a high-pitched beep, as if mocking him. Then, the machine turned around and pointed at Hades. Beep. Another high-pitched chirp was heard. Then, there was dead silence. Dead silence. Raymond. "Hades, it's broken." The kobold was furious. He picked up the machine and slapped it until it suddenly exploded. Thick smoke rose, and it was completely destroyed. It almost set the stall on fire. Hades's blood pressure was already at full capacity. He actually felt a long-lost anger because of a lowly kobold. After casually casting a 3-day sudden death curse, he snorted coldly and left without looking back. Only Raymond was left at the same spot, sweating profusely. After a long time, he finally caught his breath. He was speechless. "Can you not give me this kind of trouble next time?" He pleaded from the bottom of his heart. "I beg you, my heart is really not good. I can't take this." "It's okay. Just exercise more. I believe in you." Huaisher grinned and chewed on the curse that Hades had given him. He looked in the direction that Hades had left and smiled. Our exciting days are still long in the future. The power contained in the metal crawler, which was not even as big as a speck of dust, was not worth mentioning at all. It could not even compare to the fine crystals in hell. It was inconspicuous when mixed in the soil of hell. Now, it had already left Hades's boots and returned to Huaisher's hands. It was completely destroyed. What was really important was what was left on Hades's body. The tiny bacteria strain that had been modified from Huaisher's blood that had been diluted hundreds of times was now like a dye. Together with countless other bacteria in hell, it had stained Hades's skin and faintly seeped into his soul. It didn't have any other function other than to locate a target. But even if it was just positioning, it was enough. Huaisher's evil water was brewing in his heart, and it had already begun to churn. Everyone looked at each other. Their days in the future were going to be more and more prosperous. Not long after, a row of swaggering silhouettes appeared in the market, accompanied by a clamor of voices. The managers of the market began to patrol. They did not dare to act rashly in some of the larger stalls, but the small stalls that did not have a strong backer behind them were not so lucky. For a time, there was chaos. And just as they passed in front of Huaisher, an arrogant and despotic rat man suddenly stopped and turned around. When he saw the rotten tail flowers, his eyes lit up. "Oh, these are all good things." The rat man leader waved his hand with a smile. His subordinates immediately came up and picked up a large pile of things on the stall. Without saying a word, they directly stuffed them into their bags and turned around to leave. But before they could take 2 steps, a voice that resembled Raymond's sounded from behind them. These guys didn't even pay. In an instant, there was silence again. Everyone around fell into a daze, including Raymond. At this moment, the Tauren was lowering his head to eat. His mouth was full, and he had no idea what was going on. When the rat man looked over viciously, he subconsciously shook his head and explained, "No, slap." "How can you say that?" Huaisher slapped the back of his head and scolded angrily. You have no respect for your elders and juniors. You have no manners at all. You were the one who said it. Raymond was so angry that he was trembling. He was on the verge of tears. Just what should we do to satisfy you? Huaisher was still like an innocent stall owner, smiling obsequiously at the managers. It doesn't matter if you don't have money. Let's make friends. Yes, friends have more ways, right? Hey kid, you're smart. The rat man sneered and glanced at them. He looked at the remaining goods on the stall. These things are not bad. Immediately, his subordinates understood and rolled up all the goods and took them away. However, the rat man looked behind Huaisher and sighed. The car is not bad either. The kobold immediately panicked. Big brother, this is my treasure. Huh. The rat man looked over coldly. His subordinates' hands were all on their swords, causing the poor kobold to tremble and almost cry. It's okay. I'll give it to you. He wiped his tears and choked. You and I hit it off at first sight. It's just a car. I'll give this Tauren to you too. The rat man sneered and did not stand on ceremony. More than 10 subordinates had already overturned the stall and climbed onto the red dragon. They were really going to take the car away. In the chaos, only the kobold begged gently. However, in the end, the Tauren suddenly sneered disdainfully. Humph, your legs aren't even close. It's obvious that you're selling your butt. For a moment, dead silence fell again. No one could believe their ears. However, after seeing Raymond, they could not help but look at the Ratman leader and its butt. The Ratman's rotten face, which had begun to shed hair, was completely red, then livid, and finally turned completely black. He spasmed in anger and squeezed out a hoarse voice from between his sharp front teeth. All of you don't know what's good for you. He roared, take them away. Take them all away. Wait, everyone, let's talk nicely. The kobold screamed and turned around to escape, but he was instantly pressed to the ground. He was taken away by the managers along with the silly Tauren and his car. Only a mess was left. In the long silence, the stall owners on the left and right looked at each other with a trace of pity in their eyes. They were dead meat. Chapter 10:18. In the dark dungeon, wails and moans echoed eternally in the rancid air. At this moment, under the illumination of the fire, the sound of whipping continued. In the shackles hanging on the wall, the half-naked Tauren was already covered in wounds and had fainted. Immediately after, a basin of cold water was poured on him, waking him up. Then, the cruel whipping and ravaging began again. Only when the whip was broken did the leader angrily throw away the thing in his hand and return to the chair. He ordered coldly, beat him, continue to beat him. Be careful, don't kill him. I want him to suffer a fate worse than death. The vicious and cold voice echoed in the dungeon. In the cage in the distance, the miserable and helpless cries suddenly choked up. Stop beating him, sob, sob, sob. The pitiful and helpless Tauren wiped the corners of his eyes, his face already covered in tears. That's my brother. If you want to beat him, then beat him gently. Don't hit his face. Don't hit there. Sob, sob, sob. He's still single. My poor nephew who's still in his mother's womb. Wait, didn't you just say that he's been a virgin for 40 years? The prisoner in the cage next to him was engrossed in the story and felt that something was wrong. Then where did his child come from? This is all love. What do you know? Love is omnipotent. The Tauren was moved by true love, his eyes already hazy with tears. My brother and his childhood sweetheart were childhood sweetheart, but fate played tricks on them. After being separated for decades, his beloved cow missed him so much that she actually had a child. As the saying goes, the wishes of the 3 lifetimes are often added to a period of sorrow. When they come, They close their eyes. When they leave, they look back a few times. After reciting the opening poem, the dog-headed man picked up his bowl and slammed it on the ground. He wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and the saliva from the corner of his mouth as if he had just woken up from his stupor. Then he began to tell the story of his shocking and touching relationship. Who would have thought that the Tauren who was born with a fork in his mother's womb was actually the reincarnation of the steak left on the rancher's plate? And the cousin who stayed in his house that day was actually a piece of bone enlightened by the flute player. As the saying goes, one is the dung of the lang garden, the other is the beautiful jade with 5 flowers. For a moment, not only were the rat men sitting on the chairs listening attentively, but even the prison guards who were holding the whips with all their might were captivated. Only Forster, who was in the truck, took off his earphones and rubbed his face with a complicated expression. He really couldn't listen to it anymore. This was 2F * King Weird. But after hesitating for a moment, she couldn't help but grab her earphones, wanting to listen to a few more words. Now, the entire Red Dragon was left in the courtyard, waiting for a buyer to come to their door, or simply forcing them to sell. No one paid any attention to them. The few people hiding in the carriage were completely bored out of their minds. They had already played a few rounds of cards. As for Raymond, who was hung up and beaten, everyone seemed to have forgotten about him. Anyway, it wasn't anything important. At this moment, the Minotaur was covered in blood and wounds. He looked miserable, but in fact, he was miserable. However, this was not a problem. In any case, he was a Tier 3 sublimator. Moreover, he was a U.S. soldier that the Ivory Tower had spared no expense to cultivate. If he didn't do it on purpose, how could he be beaten like this so easily? The pain of this little whipping and the rancher's saliva attack was not worth mentioning. It was not even a massage. If it wasn't for Weisher urging him to act more realistically in the communication, he would probably have fallen asleep by now. For everyone, he had to sacrifice a little more. At most, he would give him 2 more drumsticks for dinner. Amidst the dark, damp, and dirty dungeon, countless strains of bacteria were rapidly spreading, mixing with the colorful moss. Gradually, they covered the entire dungeon from the inside out, and even the guard station outside was completely covered by the bacteria. Slender vines took root in the soil, quickly taking root and sprouting. Like 1,000 hands and 10,000 eyes, the entire area was quietly under their control. There were a total of 61 guards in the dungeon, and hundreds of guards in and out of the guard station outside. And there were 12 prisoners. 12. Wasn't this number a little too little? Moreover, all of them had been caught for trivial matters. Does it mean that everybody in Iron Hot City obeys the law and praises the good and rejects the evil? Have we already lived a happy life in the hell before we came to America? But in their hall, what was the use of the iron pot that was big enough for a Tauren to bathe in? Weisher pinched his dog mouth and fell into deep thought, thinking of the mountains of bones in the backyard, the non-existent food reserves in the canteen, and the suspicious bacon hanging on the beam. Was there something wrong with this dungeon of yours? Good times always passed quickly, and it was time to say goodbye again. Just as Weisher's brothel dream reached the part where Raymond enters Iron Flame City, the Tauren tries sex again. A clear bell rang from the dungeon. It was time for dinner. Without waiting for Weisher to finish speaking, the prison door opened. 10 or so rat men with white cloth wrapped around their heads rushed in without any explanation. They held him down in a flurry, tied him up with ropes, and dragged him out. "Hey, wait, what are you doing?" The kobold screamed and struggled. Like a pig, he was hung on a wooden stick and carried away. Just like that, he passed through the door and was directly carried into a hall. At the front of a long dining table, the boiling pot had already begun to emit smoke. Including the leader of the rat men, All the leaders in the dungeon were present. Under the triangular emblem that represented Bushuen, there was a kobold from Huaishur's family. He was wearing a priest's robe and was dancing with joy. From time to time, a dark glow would appear in the boiling pot, illuminating the excited faces holding knives and forks. When Huaishur arrived, a group of people excitedly sang praises. Their grotesque faces were filled with hunger and greed. It was almost time for dinner. Wait, what are you doing? Huaishur was anxious. Isn't there a Tauren? Why are you eating me first? The kobold priest glanced at him disdainfully. He has a lot of meat. Keep him and eat him during the festival. Hey, kobolds don't eat kobolds. Huaishur wriggled on the shelf. Although I don't have a lot of meat, I can tell stories. Hey, have you heard of high-quality cattle raising? You play music and tell stories to the cows every day, making them happy. After a long time, the meat will naturally— Wait, don't rush. Damn, I still— Plop. Without waiting for him to finish, he was thrown into the boiling pot. In an instant, a refreshing silence arrived, and everyone's hearts were instantly relieved. This dog finally shut up. Beside the pot, the kobold reached out and grabbed a huge spoon. Just as he was about to stir it, he saw a long string of bubbles, and a huge dog head slowly floated up. In the pot, it blinked at him. There was a vegetable leaf hanging from the bridge of its nose. Big brother, this water temperature doesn't seem to be enough. He lowered his head, gathered the vegetable leaf, drank a mouthful of soup, and smacked his lips. At least put some garlic sprouts to get rid of the smell. At least half a jar of salt is sprinkled. It's so pungent that it's boiling without blood. The taste is too strong, isn't it? For a moment, everyone looked at each other. Even the hymn of praise for Bushuen stopped for a moment. In the boiling pot, the kobold twisted around, shaking its head and tail, sometimes dog paddling, and sometimes butterfly swimming. It flopped around in the pot in a variety of patterns. In the end, as if it was taking a bath, it spread out its hands, placed them on the edge of the pot, and whistled. The tip of its tail was exposed, sweeping around on the surface of the water. It looked extremely comfortable. Something doesn't feel right, boss. The rat man was stunned and whispered to the warden, "Why don't we eat something else?" "How dare you?" Without waiting for the warden to speak, the kobold in the pot flew into a rage. "I eat when I say I want to eat, and I don't eat when I say I don't want to eat. Do you think I don't care about my reputation? Besides, you bunch of trash, to be able to drink the bathwater of a popular idol like me is the blessing of 8 lifetimes. You have to know how to cherish it. You understand?" At the side, the kobold shaman reached out in shock and touched the surging water. As a result, it was scalded and screamed. Even the fur on its claws fell off. But before it could retract its hand, a strange tentacle suddenly stretched out from the pot and wrapped around the kobold's head. It instantly contracted and pulled it into the pot. After a muffled sound, it disappeared without a trace. What the hell? The warden subconsciously took a step back and pulled out his axe. But with a cracking sound, the originally sturdy handle of the axe had unknowingly decayed, turning into a piece of rotten wood that could be crushed with a single pinch. Even the shining axe was covered with multicolored rust, like a comical smiling face. The warden opened his mouth and wanted to roar for help, but he suddenly choked and coughed. Viscous blood and broken organs spewed out of his mouth. Continuous cracking sounds could be heard from above his head, below his feet, and around him. From the ceiling, the ground, and the walls, tender sprouts quickly sprouted and grew. The blood-sucking vines stretched their bodies like living creatures, spreading their branches and leaves in this paradise of purgatory. Then they bared their sharp mouths and fangs at their prey. Loud screams rang out. The hellish creatures that had been holding knives and forks ready to feast immediately scattered. But before they could take 2 steps, they were tightly entangled by the blood-sucking vines and could not move. At this moment, in the midst of nothingness behind Weisher, scarlet eyes slowly opened one after another, looking down at all the dust and dirt. In the dungeon, countless flowers bloomed in an instant, entangling themselves on the bones and spreading a rich fragrance. Huge shadows wandered on the ground, silently covering the entire guard station, sealing it from the inside out. Then, the real hell was revealed here, accompanied by the thick and muffled sound of boiling in the iron pot. Darkness, thick and viscous darkness overflowed from it, crawling up the soles of everyone's feet and entangling themselves on their limbs and faces. Thousands of threads spread out, disappearing into their mouths and noses, quickly drilling inwards, until it reached the marrow. Why are you running? Isn't it time to eat? Surrounded by the shadows and ferocious birds, Weisher lifted the bowl of soup and brought it to the mouths of the guests, smiling gently. Come, drink it while it's hot. Drink this bowl of soup, and we'll be good friends forever. Chapter 1019. 2 hours later, under the soft candlelight, an appetizing aroma filled the air. On the huge dining table, rare delicacies were presented like flowing water disappearing into Zim's bottomless mouth. Broken bones and sparse oil were thrown under the table, under the grate. The beasts kept in the dark fought with all their might, gnawing on each other's flesh and the oil that fell from the air, providing a refreshing show for the dining host. Or, after arousing his appetite, it became the next fragrant meal. And just after dinner, Zim enjoyed dessert and the service of the harem. Finally, he took some time out of his busy schedule and looked at the Minotaur warrior standing at the bottom of the palace steps. What is Hades doing? He's living in seclusion. Other than the daily routine of patrolling, he doesn't do anything, the Minotaur warrior replied. But today is an exception. He talked to a foreign kobold for a while in the market, but we didn't hear what they said. Why don't we capture that kobold and interrogate him? Before I was ready to catch him, the kobold was caught by the people in the market, the Minotaur warrior replied. Okay, and then Zim waited for a long time, but there was no reply. The Minotaur warrior looked at him for a long time with a look that said, "Don't you know?" "Then there's no then. Those guys." Zim slapped his forehead. "They've been too outrageous recently. They eat everything. My God's teachings have to be carefully chosen. Forget it. I'll talk to them next time." "What about Hades?" "Humph, worrisome guy." Zim snorted coldly. "Don't let your guard down. In 2 days, find an excuse and drive him out." At the same time, in a sealed room, Hades pretended not to notice the peeping through the wall and calmly maintained his tools. However, looking at the time, that Pig Zimu should be starting to get impatient, right? As an outsider, he was still too conspicuous in Thunder White Plains. Moreover, the identity of the Abyss Jester was suspicious enough. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before Weisher would be kicked out even if he didn't come. For the sake of the plan, he had no choice but to refrain from doing anything unnecessary for the time being. Thinking up to this point, he had already made a decision. Before reinforcements arrived, he would let that fat pig be arrogant for a while longer. It was time for this transit station, which occupied 1/10 of the armaments on the front line, to change its owner. After the maintenance of everything was completed, Hades continued to monitor Weisher's position as usual. When he found that the aggro pointer had not moved, his heart sank. Weisher should really be in the White Thunder Plains. However, there were only 2 possibilities for him not to move for so long. The first possibility was that he was indeed trapped and unable to leave. The second possibility was that he had other motives. Hades closed his eyes, calculating the possibilities of various accidents, and estimating the time it would take for reinforcements to arrive. 2 days, at most 2 days, the other depths would be able to form a blockade, and the power he summoned would be enough to seal off the entire White Thunder Plains, and then wash this place from the inside out. However, for some reason, there was a lingering uneasiness in his heart. Inexplicably, he thought of the smirking kobold during the day. Hades's heart skipped a beat. He threw out a few cards from his pocket, casually flipped them over, and divined the other party's whereabouts. The cards that were flipped over were messy and didn't show any signs, but some of them vaguely fell towards the deeper depths of hell. Hades frowned slightly. Could it be that this was the envoy of some ruler? Then what was its purpose? He focused and carefully analyzed, but before he could figure out the other party's origin, the spoiler had already seen the result. Dead. Even before Hades's curse took effect, the other party seemed to have died in an accident, and there was a hint of greed involved, a symbol of devouring. Was he eaten? Hades was stunned for a long time, and he couldn't help but shake his head, laughing at his own oversensitive nerves. This was hell, and it was never strange to have secrets, and people with heavy responsibilities were even more common. Unfortunately, all kinds of sudden and tragic deaths, plundering and ravaging were the main theme. He no longer paid attention to these things, and once again threw himself into the preparations. He had to ensure that there were no mistakes in taking down this place. At the same time, in the dungeon, the kobold, who had just finished a hot bath and was draped in a rat skin towel, suddenly sneezed. Which little bastard is investigating my origin now? Huaisher shook his head and muttered to himself, "Didn't I just take your ship? Why are they so fixated on it?" At this time, the only person who could divine Huaisher and trigger the Book of Destiny's feedback was probably Hades. He wasn't worried at all that he would expose himself. With the existence of the Book of Destiny, unless one's authority was as high as the Astronomical Society, no matter which god wanted to perform divination, they would probably be led into a ditch by all sorts of tangled and chaotic phenomena. The more powerful ones would be able to tell that Huaisher wasn't simple, but at most they would only be able to see the character that Huaisher had written in the Book of Destiny, and believe that he really was a dog-faced kobold. After all, what kind of bad intentions could a little dog have? Huaisher muttered to himself as he shook his head. He sat cross-legged on a chair and glanced at the frozen frostbone sitting across from him. Name. Within the origin substance seal, the shriveled corpse covered in frost and fog twitched violently. It struggled and opened its mouth to scream, but no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't reach the outside world. TSK, forget it. Feed the prince some soup. Huaisher waved his hand. A minotaur picked up a spoon and scooped up a ladle full of sticky, pitch-black bath water. Then the toolmen on the left and right used pliers to pry open the corpse's mouth and force the thick, healthy soup into its mouth. After drinking a bowl of thick, healthy soup, the corpse indeed looked much healthier. Even its face had become ruddy. It was very nutritious. However, its eyes gradually lost focus, and the cold fog around its body began to stir violently. It was dyed with a layer of pink, and the corpse twisted and turned on the chair like a maggot. Accompanied by a series of ba sounds, it had completely lost its consciousness. Huaisher knocked on the birdcage next to him. A crow hopped out from within and spread its wings. It suddenly transformed into origin substance and dove into Frostbone's eye socket, disappearing without a trace. Very quickly, a metallic light appeared in Frostbone's eyes. Holy! Frostbone let out a series of excited cries as it began to spasm violently. Its arms flapped out of habit. "Thank you, brother. I'm fine now. If you're fine, then next." Huaisher calmly waved his hand, then looked at another rat man who had been brought up and was beginning to spasm in fear. He smiled amiably. Name? About 2 hours later, everyone was fully healed, even though they didn't know why they had recovered so quickly this time. In any case, after a few months, Weischer's magical cooking dishes had once again received unanimous praise from the customers. The stewing oneself in an iron pot had received unanimous praise from the crows, and they even wanted to order 2 bowls. Only Raymond, who was standing to the side, wanted to say something, but hesitated. He could finally tell that Weischer wasn't human. Good Lord, he had poisoned, cursed, and even used people to plant flowers. Not only had he brainwashed them with bath water, but he had also used a large group of corpses to resurrect their souls. This entire process was even more sinister than the underworld. There wasn't even a trace of yang energy. How fortunate was the celestial genealogy to have such a treasure. In any case, after a few short hours apart from a few teammates who could finally get out of the car, there wasn't a single normal person left. Without anyone noticing, he had turned the prison and the guard station outside into his own under the city lord's nose. If he had a few more days, he would probably be able to replace everyone from top to bottom in this hell. Not only that, through the parasitism and control of the crow's origin form, Weischer had also dug out many good things from the brains of these hospitable locals. For example, there was a detailed map spread out on the table in front of them, most of the surrounding plantations and scattered fortresses, as well as the rough demarcation of most of the areas in Iron Flame City, the location of the barracks, the situation of the internal and external defenses, the location of the important characters, and most importantly, the location of all the warehouses in the volcano factory. Everything had been marked out on the map. When he saw Weischer's eyes darting around, Raymond felt his hair stand on end. I say, Weischer, cough, cough. Captain Weischer, since we've finished our disguise, we're almost done with our meal. He did his best to soften his voice as he asked in a gentle voice, Then let's go? Why should we go? Weischer raised his head and looked over with a puzzled expression. We're already here, and it's New Year's. Besides, I'm the disaster sword, yet that bastard Hades is chasing me around like a rabbit. Do I not care about my reputation? It was true that they could run now, but there was no need for that. There was no point. Even if they ran away, as long as Hades was still alive, the aggro indicator would still be in their hands, and they could only be chased around. This was hell. Who knew when they would be chased into that guy's trap? Passively running away was just a slow suicide. If they wanted to solve this problem, they had to find an opportunity to give this guy a hard time. Even if they couldn't kill him, they had to make him suffer the consequences. Not only did Raymond's reminder not have any effect, but it also attracted Weischer's attention. That gaze, which was a mixture of surprise, astonishment, and realization, made the back of his head feel cold. He habitually moved back a little. What? I'm warning you, although I'm a truck driver, I've always been clean and honest. I won't accept any unspoken rules. I say, old Ray. Weischer stroked his chin and said pleasantly, Raymond, thank you. The Tauren raised his hand and corrected him solemnly. Even if the abbreviation is also Ray, please don't add the word old. I think that although we're colleagues in a workplace, we're not that close in private. We need to keep a little distance. Hey, look at you. Are you treating me like an outsider? We're friends. We've been through life and death together. Weischer leaned over and put his arm around his neck with great enthusiasm. He asked in a seemingly casual manner, I remember that you're about to advance, right? He paused for a moment and smiled meaningfully. How's the preparation going? Chapter 10:20. Wait, what do you want to do? Raymond thought of the subtle expression on Weischer's face when the head teacher asked about the review situation at the end of the semester. He couldn't help but feel disgusted. "I'm just concerned about you." Weischer advised earnestly, "You're already in your 30s. Don't always be addicted to driving. You have to have a goal in life. For example, advance to the next level?" "No, I think I can wait for a while." Raymond shook his head like an electric drill, almost leaving after images. "What advance? If I don't advance, I won't advance in my life. Third level is good. I like third level. I don't like it." Red Dragon suddenly poked its head in from the window, blinking its 2 car lights. "Let's be honest. I think we can consider it. Consider my ass." Raymond was furious. "We haven't paid off the loan yet. Isn't that because you're paying the lowest every month? You want to slack off." "I'm just recovering from a serious illness," Raymond retorted. "I'm still growing. What's wrong with saving money and eating more? Besides, advancing in such a hurry will definitely be unstable. What if there are some sequelae? It's a small matter." Weischer waved his hand. "If the foundation is unstable, change it. If there's a problem with the car chassis, change it. If there's a headache, change the head. If there's a foot pain, change the foot. Other paths might require some worry, but the Eternal Road didn't have this problem at all. The Eternal Road didn't have anything else, but modularization was the best. As the saying goes, 30% depends on hard work and 70% depends on spending money. It was all about spending money to win. If the graphics card wasn't good enough, change it. If the memory wasn't good enough, add the memory. If 2 solid state wasn't enough, add 4 solid state. Other paths might have high and low configurations, but on the Eternal Road, no matter who you were after advancing, you would be a blank slate. If you wanted good things, you had to spend money. This kind of thing was completely casual. Raymond was stunned. Even if there's no problem with the foundation, there aren't enough materials. Forster coughed and looked out the window. There are materials everywhere in hell. Moreover, the things that are used are all about quantity and not quality, so there shouldn't be a problem. There's still no energy source. Raymond was annoyed. Where are you going to find a cable in hell? Anton was grinding beans slowly after changing his coffee cup. He looked up when he heard that. This place is rich in geothermal resources. With a little preparation, we can build a very good geothermal power station. How did that secret instrument? Raymond was only halfway through his last sentence when he saw the old shepherd's glowing eyes. He was at a loss for words. "Leave it to me." Gregory rubbed his small hands. "Back then, when Osiris was working, those guys said that there were too many precision parts and didn't let me get involved. I was so angry. I haven't accumulated enough." Raymond said in a trembling voice, "I haven't completed Gordium's destiny yet." "What level?" In the long silence, no one spoke. They just stared at him, including the Red Dragon, until he awkwardly looked away. They had never seen such a shameless person. As early as 180 years ago, Raymond's destiny had been completely completed. It was called the Chariot of Destiny. The most famous anecdote about Gordium, besides the sacred chariot dedicated to Zeus, was the Gordium knot that symbolized destiny. If this seamless knot of dogwood could be untied, one could receive the coronation of Providence and become the king of the lineage that reigned over Asia. In the end, the one who completed this trial was King Alexander of Macedon, who had the blood of Zeus and Ammon. The method he used was to draw his sword and completely cut this authoritative relic that had inherited many modifiers into 2. After crossing the destiny bestowed by the gods, he used his own hands to rule the whole world. And from then on, Gordium's true intent was to place himself above fate. To put it simply, it was to go against the heavens and change fate, breaking through the predicament of certain death, and then opening a new path. My fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens. It was probably referring to such a hero. Although Raymond was now in such a decadent state and was addicted to the life of a truck driver, it did not mean that he had never had a glorious moment. In the past, he was also a vigorous young man in bright clothes. As early as when he betrayed the Eye of Nightmare in order to save his partner, the Red Dragon, and usurped the stone heart that was dedicated to Eve Lit, he had already completed Gordium's destiny. If not for this, Russell would not have lent a helping hand and let his stigmata be transferred to celestial genealogy. Get on the bus first, then buy the ticket later. Long before the advancement, Raymond's destiny had already been settled. All along, what had been stuck before the fourth level was the curse of the rancher in his body. After comprehending Supreme and controlling the curse of the mouth of the abyss, the path ahead of him was simply smooth, smoother than Huaisher's. The reason why he did not advance was, firstly, because time was tight, and there was no time. Secondly, it was because this dog wanted to continue to slack off, so he dragged it on, pretending that nothing happened. It's decided then, as Huaisher's substitute, Forster, the vice captain, nodded. Other than Raymond himself, Huaisher's advancement proposal was unanimously approved by everyone. It was not that they despised the car for not being easy to use, but at this juncture, if the vehicle could be upgraded, it would be beneficial for the subsequent exploration of the abyss. As a veteran tool of the Ivory Tower, before Huaisher, Raymond had always been loved by everyone for his work attitude of being able to endure hardships, be able to work hard, live well, and not clingy. Now that there was a better tool, it did not mean that everyone would throw the tool to the back of their minds. On the contrary, they had already made plans. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Russell wanted to train him to be one of the main drivers of the Heavens Fortress, Horus, in the future. He might even be the chief. Unlike the Osiris Infernal Destroyer, which had its own stigmata, the Infernal Fortress Horus was much more convenient. At most, it could accommodate several hundred ascendants of the Eternal Road to carry out various operations. Furthermore, the more people there were, the more effective it would be. Because it was too big, it was completely designed to integrate mobile bases, logistics supply, wartime command, and other functions as a deep-moving city. A headquarters that had grown wings and could escape at any time. If it were to be compared to the Heavens Fortress, then Raymond's advancement would certainly not be the predecessor of Osiris Anubis, but the legendary object that once carried the gods, carried the scorching sun, and went deep into the underworld every day. Solar ship, get ready, we're going to do something big. Huaisher rubbed his hands and spread the map on the table again. Then he picked up a pen and sketched on it. Everyone, come here, I have a plan. I don't want any plans. Old Salted Fish Raymond looked up at the sky and sighed. Wasn't this trip for Huaisher's advancement? Why was it his turn all of a sudden? It was as if after finally stepping down from the position of the chief tool, he had finally hugged the thigh of the new tool boss and wanted to win without doing anything. In the end, he did not expect that he would go from being the chief tool to the chief tool of the chief tool. It could only be said that life was like a Matryoshka doll. You would never know to what extent it could reach if he wanted to fight against the Matryoshka doll. He could only use a stronger Matryoshka doll. Raymond made up his mind. It was time to train his own tool. Half an hour later, the planned communication was completed. After another half an hour, everyone had solved their other doubts and formulated a backup strategy. Then, there was only 4 hours of rest left. Forster and Gregory seized the time to sleep, while Huaisher and Anton walked into the empty dungeon. Looking at the piles of debris and bones, they exchanged glances. They took out their satchels and began to set up the temporary workshop. Next, they would start to build the geothermal power station. Fortunately, the space was big enough. 15 minutes later, the two of them began their work. For hours later, Raymond turned into a tyrant again. He put on his helmet and casually grabbed an unlucky person from the market outside to drink soup. After a set of procedures, the unlucky person sat on the roof of the Red Dragon in a daze and left Iron Flame City, heading straight for the front line. In the eyes of others, it was just that the bastards in charge of the market had casually grabbed another person. After taking all the goods and money, they forced him to sell a broken car and drove him away. This was a routine operation that was commonplace. After leaving the city for a short distance, the Red Dragon began to speed up. 2 hours later, it had already made a deep jump and returned to the eternal rain paradise shrouded in acid rain and poisonous clouds. Distance 16 kilometers. Under the cover of the poisonous fog, the Red Dragon reported. The radar screen showed a heavily guarded camp 16 kilometers away. 2 large groups of hell were stationed there, and over 1,000 mutants were wandering around the periphery. In the deepest part of the camp, there were piles of supplies sent to the front line by the Sea of Thunder. Forster smoked a cigar. He didn't expect to find the first place. In the book in his hand, there was information that Weisher had gathered from the market records. It was the next destination and route of all the transport teams that had passed through Iron Flame City. The task assigned to Forster and Gregory was very simple: find a few teams and then do something big. The bigger, the better. But in reality, they didn't need to do anything. They only needed to be responsible for running, find the place, find the people, and determine the location. Then, according to Weisher's instructions, Forster opened the birdcage next to him. Then, in the darkness that was enshrouded in eternal dream, pairs of hungry scarlet eyes appeared. Behind the open car window, the sound of a tidal wave suddenly burst forth. Countless iron crows spread their wings and soared into the sky, bathed in poisonous gas and acid rain. Then, in the dark, poisonous clouds, strands of iron light overlapped with each other. Then, countless iron crows fell from the sky like cannonballs. The loud noises and roars lasted for 5 minutes. Even though they were 16 kilometers away, the surging flames burned the entire dark sky red. After 5 minutes, there was no more camp. The Red Dragon galloped over. The back of the carriage opened, and one after another, fresh and warm cyborgs jumped out. Braving the acid rain, they began to search for any usable supplies in the scorched earth. Or they skinned and cooked hell creatures on the spot and cut out their internal organs to preserve them. After half an hour, there was only wreckage left on the ground. The Red Dragon swaggered off. In the driver's seat, Forster turned a page of the notebook in his hand. The next one. Then the next one. Chapter 10:21. But what's the use of doing this? After receiving the news that everything was going well from the other side, Raymond asked, we have created results, we have won, and we have caused damage. But no matter how you look at it, it doesn't help the current situation. Raise your arms a little. Weisher was holding an electric drill in his hand. He was removing the bulletproof ceramic plate on the outer layer of his sternum. Sparks flew, and a numbered shell was removed from his body. He said, on the one hand, it's to collect some supplies. On the other hand, it's to cause a little commotion to attract attention. Let people know that I'm outside. Raymond frowned. With the hatred indicator and the blacklist, will Hades really believe it? It doesn't matter if he believes it or not. The key is that someone believes it. Weisher put aside the instrument that was removed from the metal skeleton and let Raymond return to the factory state as much as possible to avoid unnecessary interference during the advancement. After doing all this, he asked slowly, do you think that when the news of Weisher's appearance in other hell spreads, The locals will still be willing to let a jester squat in their backyard. You want them to fight among themselves? Raymond suddenly understood, but he couldn't help but doubt. Is that possible? Of course, it's unrealistic to eat until you're fat. But the first step is to plant the seeds of distrust. Our opponents have never really been on the same side. Weisher said, "Hell is not the realm. There are no rules here. There are no rules that are effective at all depths. There is no constant thing that can provide guarantee. Then, the value of everything can only be measured by strength. This means that both sides can't look at the problem from an equal position except for deterrence. Communication is destined to be useless. No, after the communicative power of language is weakened, the deceit has increased. Trust can't exist because the price of betrayal is sometimes too small." Under the illumination of the shadowless lamp, Weisher's expression became subtle. "Do you dare to trust a jester?" A projection from the endless sea appeared in front of Hades. "Weisher has appeared in my jurisdiction. Qing Yen said, Green, I said, according to other people, a total of 6 supply teams were attacked." "Impossible." Hades replied flatly, "The hatred needle hasn't changed. I'm sure he's still in our blockade." Qing Yen said, "But that's exactly what happened. We discovered traces of his origin substance equipment at the scene, and it was the only one of its kind in the entire territory. Hades, you miscalculated. He has already caused harm to us." Hades was silent as he read the news from afar. His expression gradually turned gloomy. After a long time, he slowly shook his head. "No, it's the opposite. He's trying to hide something. Reason? 6 supply teams? For camps." A transit station? Hades flipped through the damage report and sneered. "Maybe this is a loss to some people, but to him, it's not even a small matter. Qing Yen, you don't understand him. A person like him would never be satisfied with just causing a little bit of trouble. On the contrary, his nature is to cause massive destruction. No matter where he goes, he will always bring chaos and destruction. It was just a small loss. To him, it was not even an appetizer. This kind of person definitely wouldn't be satisfied with a small harassment mission. He's testing us. He wants to find an opportunity to take a full gamble. This could all be part of his plan to lure the tiger away from the mountain." He replied coldly, "I won't remove the blockade around the area. Qing Yen, I won't let him escape either." "What if that's his goal?" Qing Yen suddenly asked. "What if he doesn't want you to remove the blockade? Hades, what will you do?" "Hades, we gave you the manpower in the rear in order to ensure the stability of the rear, as much as possible not to take Weisher's head. If he's sure that he's hiding under your nose, he can use himself to pin down opponents and all your energy. Then his mission will be a success. The rest can naturally be left to his companions." Hades was unmoved. "I stand by my judgment." Qing Yen nodded. He wasn't angry. After reminding him, he just took a deep look at his new colleague and told him, "Don't worry, Brother Yen. Then I'll wait for your result." The projection dissipated. In the long silence, Hades was expressionless. From Qing Yan's words, it was obvious that most people were dissatisfied with his efficiency, or rather, they were mocking his reaction that was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. There were even a few people who wanted to use this opportunity to make trouble. Those people simply didn't understand what kind of opponent they were facing. Hades muttered and ordered the encirclement to shrink through the water mirror. If necessary, he would forcibly seal off this hell, although a hasty action would be unreliable and make people question whether the withered king he represented had the intention to take advantage of the preparations for the war of all worlds to annex other forces. At this time, he couldn't care less about the attitude of other parties. The most important thing now was to nip all unexpected factors in the bud. and at the same time he gave the order, there were low footsteps outside the door. As well as the hostility that had yet to be unleashed, after the door was pushed open, the indifferent Minotaur outside the door gave the order from the master to the guest, who had stayed for a long time. "Fool, the master said that your prey is not here. He said, you should go." Not only him, but behind him in the courtyard outside, and even in the deepest part of the city palace, there were faint malicious gazes. In the short silence, Hades suppressed the anger in his heart and nodded stiffly. "I know. Please report to the city lord that I will leave on my own later." "No, now, immediately." The Minotaur stepped forward and told him Lord Zim doesn't like to delay. Hades looked at the messenger in front of him indifferently. The Minotaur also pressed the long sword at his waist and looked at each other. After a long silence, Hades slowly nodded. "Okay." Just like that. Instead of saying that it was a gift, it was more like an escort. In the middle of a large group of fully armed hell, Hades stepped on the road expressionlessly. But before leaving the city gate, on the wide street, they passed by another solemn group walking towards the palace. At the front of the group, accompanied by the city lord's messenger, the dog-headed man in a gorgeous robe turned around and looked at Hades. He nodded slightly as if he was greeting him, feeling the stunned and venomous gaze. He grinned and revealed a smile. "Hello, goodbye." As early as half an hour ago, Huaishur received the news from the crow that a large group of people in the city were gathering and shrinking towards Hades' location. He turned around and instructed Raymond, "Inform Mr. Forster that they can come back as soon as possible." As he spoke, he pressed the button on the table. The operation began. "Then, I wish you all the best." The old professor, Anton, had already put on a full set of protective gear. At this moment, he picked up his helmet and put it on his face. Like an astronaut about to take off, he waved goodbye. Then, he climbed down the ladder slightly clumsily. He climbed down to the deepest part of the dungeon, into the shelter that had been dug out. For the next few hours, he would have to stay there alone, waiting for the signal from Huaishur. At the same time, following Huaishur's orders, the hell creatures that had been brainwashed and reincarnated began to move all over the city. After bypassing the most heavily guarded city defenses and key positions, they spread out in all directions. A rat wearing an iron helmet swaggered into the cafeteria. Amidst the strange, nauseating smell in the air, the huge iron pot was churning with internal organs that had not been bled and all kinds of messy things. Just like that, it casually tossed a cloth bag into the iron pot and left. From the beginning to the end, no one cared. Meanwhile, in the dark sewers, weeds and strange flowers emerged from the dirty water and the cold soil, silently poking their heads out. Countless strains and spores spread in the air, filled with putrid stench, along with malice. More and more large groups gradually gathered at the foundry under the volcano, under the light of the huge furnace. Strange smiles appeared on their faces. Closing his eyes, he felt the iron crows get into position one after another. Huaishur also turned back into the appearance of a kobold. Finally, it's time for the biggest bait to appear. Huaishur carefully put on the gold, silver, and jewelry on his body and solemn clothes. He turned around and asked Raymond, "How's my outfit?" "You look more like a kobold than a kobold." Raymond said from the bottom of his heart, "You're a dog among dogs." "Thank you." Huaishur patted the Tauren's shoulder and praised sincerely, "You're not bad either." Just like that, after changing their appearances, they walked out from the other end of the market and led the solemn team into the street. Like any foreign emissary, they swaggered through the gate of the inner city and the heavy blockades and walked toward the ferocious palace beside the volcano. They had an audience with the city lord. After the Tauren guards carefully searched his body, Huaisher walked into the hall with his head held high, dragging his cumbersome robe. Russell, on the throne, Zim, who was as large as a mountain of flesh, chewed on the winged serpent's tenderloin and bones. He laughed mockingly at the hunched subordinate next to the throne. Ha! This name sounds like an old bastard. Instantly, a burst of laughter spread out from the main hall. Those ferocious monsters lowered their heads and looked down at the trembling kobold crawling on the ground. They didn't hide their evil intentions and appetite at all. Below the throne, the snake-faced officiator glanced at the list of gifts that the emissary had brought over. His expression changed slightly, and he presented it to his master. At a time like this, it was rare to find a fat sheep that could take out so many origin crystals as a gift. For the sake of the gifts, the atmosphere in the hall eased slightly. When the emissary Russell conveyed his master's will to Zim, the atmosphere became even more lively. 50,000 pieces of rune armor, 3,000 pieces of heavy crossbow parts, 16 resentful bone blades. Zim flipped through the order in his hands, his expression changing slightly. He finally moved his gaze away from the food and looked at the proud kobold. Such a large order, and in such a hurry. It won't be easy to deliver it on time. You should know that there are still the believers of the Dragon of Decay and the giants of the Sea of Thunder in front of you. Compared to them, what is your master? Compared to my master, what are that pile of rotten meat and that deformed dwarf? The emissary below the stairs sneered. Next, please allow me to introduce him to everyone. The savior of all kobolds, the eternal ruler of the hell of steel, the end of all things, the incarnation of annihilation, the ruler of holiness and glory. At this point, the kobold wagged his tongue and raised his arms, shouting fervently. The final dragon, Bahamut. Chapter 10:22. Silence. A long silence. In the hall, everyone looked at each other. Who? Zim asked. Bahamut, Huaisher repeated solemnly. Oh, so it's Lord Bahamut. Zim nodded in realization, then tilted his head and whispered to the snake-faced priest beside the throne. I've never heard of him. Have you heard of this guy before? No. The snake-faced priest shook his head in confusion. But there are as many hells in the abyss as there are grains of sand in the Ganges. Perhaps there are some. The aura of the ruler's authority and blessing on that kobold cannot be faked. He is indeed a supreme ruler. As Buishuan's chief priest, he could naturally feel the deep and dark essence of the abyss in the kobold's soul. It was even faintly above his own. Thinking about it, this guy must be a trusted subordinate of Bahamut, right? Yes, the kind that is deeply doted on. The priest guessed maliciously. After receiving confirmation from the priest, Zim's doubts were slightly dispelled. He looked down at the kobold, but other than the fact that he was very tasty, he could not feel anything else. Although he had never heard of Bahamut's name, he could just treat him as the king of kobolds. If I provide your master with what he wants, how does he intend to repay my kindness? Zim asked coldly. The great, holy, supreme, benevolent, the generous Bahamut will not treat any of his allies unfairly. After using 100,000 adjectives to praise himself, Huaisher raised his head and said with a trembling voice, You will receive my master's precious friendship. Friendship? Zim could not help but laugh out loud. Your friendship with the kobold king, what use is it? How much is this thing worth in hell? With Buishuan's favor, so many rulers did not dare to offend him. What is it worth? Other than that, Zim asked impatiently, take out something practical, kobold. My patience is limited. The kobold was stunned and dumbfounded. Zim's face gradually darkened. So Bahamut isn't sincere at all. For a moment, the hall was filled with malice again. The snake-faced priest got the hint and spat out his tongue. His eyes were cold. Sir, Are you here to make fun of us? Wait. The kobold panicked. I can make the decision to add another 30,000. Not enough. Zim was not even interested in listening to him. He interrupted. Show me your sincerity, Russell. For the sake of your gift, I'll give you another chance. On the throne, the city lord, who was like a mountain of flesh, opened his mouth, and the phantom of a giant worm appeared behind him. Lava dripped from its mouth, which was filled with sharp teeth. He had long been unable to endure the thirst. Wait, wait! The dog-headed man shrieked in shock. Treasure! That's right. I still have a treasure to offer. As a gift from my master, it will definitely satisfy you. After a moment of silence, the corners of Zimu's mouth curled into an ambiguous smile. Oh. He casually waved his hand. Then show it to me. If you send me away with ordinary goods, you'll have to pay the price for your offense. Yes, yes. The kobold's eyes were hazy with tears. His expression was twitching, and he looked like he was about to pee his pants. The monsters in the hall burst into laughter. Huaisher lowered his head and clenched his fists, trying to control himself. Don't laugh out loud. He was still worried about how to give it away, but he didn't expect the other party to directly ask for it. F.A., hurry up and bring the treasure in. In an instant, the door opened. The Tauren's imposing figure appeared. He held his head high, majestically and mightily carrying a tray, and strode into the hall. In his hand, the tray covered in a thin layer of gauze was emitting a dark and deep aura of hell. It was fascinating. In an instant, the atmosphere in the hall changed. Everyone couldn't help but stretch their necks and look down. It was like a fish had taken the bait. Sir, please take a look. Huaisher grinned and reached out to pull off the gauze on the tray, revealing the majestic and ferocious crown. This is Zim's 6 eyes were already shining. Like light bulbs, they released the light of greed and desire. He didn't even hide his joy and excitement. He coveted it. This is really a good treasure. Huaisher was stunned. He didn't expect such a development, but since the other party liked it, it proved that his plan didn't have any problems. He immediately climbed up the pole and continued to boast. That's right, this is what I worked so hard to pass. Enough, no need to say any more. I already know. Zim suddenly slammed the table and interrupted him, shouting excitedly, I fully feel your sincerity. After that, without waiting for Huaisher to speak, he couldn't wait to pat his belly and beckoned to Huaisher. Beauty, beauty, come here quickly. That's right. Hurry up and give the treasure. Wait a minute. Huaisher was in a daze, as if he finally realized what was wrong. It wasn't until now that he realized, although most of the monsters in the hall were coveting the treasure presented by Huaisher on the tray, there were still a few monsters, including Zim. Their covetous and greedy gazes seemed to be subtly deviating. They didn't even look at the things on the tray. Everyone's eyes widened as they focused their attention on Raymond, who was still smiling foolishly. Huaisher felt like he understood something, but also like he didn't understand anything. He only felt that something was wrong. Is there something wrong with you guys? Zim was still shouting excitedly, waving his 4 arms at Raymond. Saliva dripped from the corners of his mouth, but his voice was sweet and gentle. He couldn't wait. Beauty, don't be afraid. Come here quickly. Let me take a good look at you. Huaisher's expression gradually became sluggish. Not only him, in the shelter in the dungeon, in the Red Dragon car hundreds of kilometers away from the city, everyone looked at each other and leaned toward the screen in a daze. They suspected that there was something wrong with their brains. Only Raymond, who was still smiling foolishly, finally realized that something was wrong, and his smile gradually disappeared. Wait a minute, friend. Huaisher turned his head stiffly and pointed at Raymond behind him. He couldn't believe it. He's a beauty? Zim frowned. His eyes became slightly cold. He seemed to be angry. Are you kidding me, dog-headed man? He slammed the table and questioned with a trembling voice, how can such a beauty not be called a beauty? Why didn't feel good, and he looked at the silly dog-headed man in a daze. Beauty? Him. Are you serious, friend? It's more than beauty. It's simply beauty. Zim wiped his saliva and lowered his head to look at his subordinate. Maud, what do you think? At the bottom of the stairs, the usually indifferent Minotaur warrior nodded in agreement. This beauty is heroic and dignified, with exuberant hair and a round nose, especially this pair of horns, with a pure natural luster and curve. To be honest, I'm already in love with him. He swallowed his saliva, and the greed in his eyes couldn't be faked. Lord Zim, our contract will continue for another 400 years, and you will reward him to me. How about that? Reward? What nonsense are you talking about? Zim looked up to the sky and laughed. A beauty's sincerity needs to be won by his own sincerity. You don't need to mention such nonsense in the future. But if you really have the ability to take the beauty's heart from my hands, it's not impossible to consider. Hearing this, Maud looked at Raymond with a burning gaze. But this treasure, Huai sure pointed at the crown on the tray in a daze, while Zim waved his hand indifferently. That kind of thing, although rare, is nothing to care about. Just put it away in the warehouse later. But he's a male. Huai sure was in despair. Stupid. In the face of true love, what's the insignificant gender that can't be crossed? Zim glanced at Huaishur in disdain. You really don't know what love is. Kobold. Damn it. Huaishur only felt that his shattered worldview was about to be completely pieced back together. When he began to feel that he was gradually adapting to this place, life would always suddenly stab him in unexpected places. Is this hell? It's really too scary. Very good, very good. I've fully felt Bahamut's sincerity. Zim leaned forward, and the mountain of meat behind the shore table trembled like water waves. His fat face was full of intoxication. Beauty, my beauty! Quick, come to me! Dead silence. In the dead silence, Raymond turned his head with difficulty and cast a pleading look at Huaishur. Huaishur, however, acted as if he didn't see it. He looked around and urged, cough, cough, cough. F.A., why are you still in a daze? Didn't you hear the master calling you? Quick, go over. Raymond was in complete despair and almost cried out loud. He glared at Huaishur. Damn it, why? Huaishur looked back. You can't catch the wolf without risking the child. In order to advance, I'm just selling my body. What's there to be afraid of? Look at me. I've been selling my body all this time. Aren't I still a flawless jade? And a virgin? How can this be the same? Raymond's eyes were hazy with tears. Adapt to the situation. I believe in you. Huaishur gave him a thumbs up. Just like that, the Tauren was sent to Zim like a walking corpse. What's your name, beauty? Zim smiled foolishly. F.A., Raymond answered with difficulty. He tried to put on a pitiful look. My name is F.A. F.A., a good name, a good name. Zim hugged the Tauren and walked towards the back of the hall. Come, beauty, let's go to the back and play games. My house is quite big. If you're tired, you can sleep directly. It's okay. Before he was swallowed by the darkness, Raymond turned his head and cast a resentful look at Huaishur. Huaishur, on the other hand, could only watch as his most important partner was taken away by that stupid and smelly fatty. When he thought about how he was going to do this, and that to him soon, he couldn't stop smiling sadly. After Zim left, Huaishur was also brought to the side hall by the snake-faced priest. After dismissing the left and right, Only the Tauran warrior Maud was left to accompany them. The two sides began to discuss the details of the cooperation. After the dog-headed man sat down, he looked around nervously. In order to not blaspheme the mission of my lord, I'd like to ask just to be safe. There won't be any leaks here, right? The snake-faced priest smiled proudly. Don't worry, no one will spy on this place. Then I'm relieved. Weisher breathed a sigh of relief. In an instant, darkness swept over and covered the inside and outside, cutting off all sound. Then, the sword of virtue stabbed into the snake-faced priest's throat. Blood splattered and landed on Weisher's face with a familiar fragrance. He let out a long breath, wiped away the scarlet on his face, and looked at the stunned Tauran. Phew, that feels good. Chapter 10:23. Suddenly, he began to attack. The shadow beneath Weisher's feet quickly transformed into returning ruins, sealing him from the inside out. Immediately afterwards, Weisher pulled out his sword, stepped off the table, and stabbed forward. The virtuous sword pierced through the snake-faced ancestor's throat, nailing it to the chair. However, it wasn't dead yet. The sound of something shattering could be heard from its body. The gemstone ring, the bone necklace, and the pale scale under its collarbone began to light up, then dimmed under the suppression of returning ruins. Under the suppression of the decaying dream's ruler, most of the items instantly collapsed. The counterattack was stifled. The snake-faced ancestor struggled, but its blood was ignited by the virtuous sword's light. It was completely engulfed in flames, unable to move. At the same time, Weisher's other hand swung out. The blade of resentment expanded, instantly crossing a distance of several meters and sweeping across the Minotaur warrior Maud's throat. Maud felt a chill in his throat. He couldn't make a sound, but when he saw that the snake-faced ancestor had been attacked, he immediately threw a punch at Weisher without hesitation. Instantly, blood spurted out from his throat, but before much blood could flow out, it had already completely healed. Pessimistic thoughts flashed through his mind along with the blade of resentment, causing his movements to become sluggish for a moment. Even so, that terrifying power still caused waves of thunder to rumble within the returning ruins' seal. In an instant, he clashed head-on with the blade of hatred. The sharp blade tore his palm apart and got stuck in his arm. Weisher's arm, however, began to emit the sound of joints grinding against each other. It had actually been dislocated by the recoil. This feeling was something that he hadn't felt in a long time, but Weisher's movements didn't stop. He stepped off the table and flew into the air. The axe of wrath appeared, and the flaming blade slashed downwards, instantly severing the bull's horn and embedding itself in his skull. Cords flew through the air. In the blink of an eye, countless deep, crisscrossing cuts appeared on Maud's body. However, his bones were simply too sturdy, to the point that Weisher's origin substance equipment was unable to slice through them in an instant. Maud ignored the spear of compassion that had pierced through his body and reached out to pull out his sword, trading injury for injury. In an instant, the sword covered in vicious curses sank into Weisher's body. "Kill him, Maud!" Sitting on the chair, Snakeface involuntarily let out a sinister laugh. With M.O. does life force. Even if he jumped into a volcano, he would still be able to quickly regenerate. It was simply wishful thinking to want to use a sword to kill him. But then it finally realized that something was wrong. Why didn't that sharp blade, which was made of half of the curses in Iron Flame City, pierce through Weisher's chest but not come out of his back? Instead, it was as if it had sunk into a quagmire, disappearing bit by bit. No matter how tightly M.O. declenched his fist, he tried to pull it back. In this short moment of stupor, the sound of distant tides suddenly echoed in the narrow room, the sound of surging tides. The whale's song could be heard faintly. As for Huaishur, he raised his fist, aimed it at Maud's face, and punched out. The Tauren roared hoarsely and raised his fist as well, smashing it towards Huaishur. Then there was a continuous sound of collapsing, and the bones shattered like mud. But it wasn't Huaishur's arm that was broken. It was more than half of the Tauren's body. It was as if a manor had fallen from the sky and crushed it head-on. Under Ah Fang's support, the infinite power also collapsed in an instant. Together with half of his head, he was smashed into pieces by a single punch. Then, without waiting for him to recover, Huaishur's body nimbly supported his shoulder, landed behind him, and suddenly trampled towards his knee. Accompanied by a crisp sound that made one's scalp tingle, the Tauren's knee, together with the bones that were above steel, shattered. Involuntarily, he knelt on the ground. On the shattered face, flesh and blood rapidly grew. Maud raised his arm that was pierced by resentment, wanting to attack Huaishur behind him. However, the resentment that was nailed into his arm bloomed with a blood-red light, crazily absorbing his blood and life. Then a rope appeared in Huaishur's hand, wrapped around his neck, and quickly formed a knot. Under Huaishur's pull, it tightened. Maud's healing came to an abrupt halt in an instant. The Tauren roared. A huge force kept bursting out, trying to break free, but it couldn't escape the entanglement of the rope of sorrow. That exuberant, monster-like life was of no use. Even the power that could destroy a city had no effect under the restraint and suppression. Suffocation came suddenly. On that incomplete face, the single bloodshot eye widened in despair. It wanted to call for help, but it couldn't make a sound. Only weak, rustling sounds emerged from its throat. He raised his hand and grabbed the face behind him, pulling with difficulty, but to no avail. The palm that pulled the rope was as steady as an iron clamp. Gradually it closed. Only a hoarse and low singing sounded in his ears, echoing in the darkness of despair. "Sleep, sleep, my dear baby. Mother's hands are gently rocking you." Huaishur looked up at the sky calmly and sang gently, "Sleep, sleep, my dear baby. Father's arm will always protect you." On the chair, in the burning flames of virtue, the snake face waited with dull eyes. He watched in despair as Maud's movements gradually slowed down and was swallowed by death bit by bit. But what scared him even more was that behind Maud, the face that had never changed from the beginning to the end was not ferocious or cold. It was so gentle and calm, as if it was hugging a baby. He sang softly. It wasn't until the baby in his arms no longer moved in the midst of the greedy predation that Huaishur slowly released his fingers. He let the body that had shriveled into a stone fall to the ground and collapse into dust. In the dead silence, the man from the present realm stretched his slightly stiff body that hadn't moved for a long time. He stroked his messy hair and finally turned his head to look at the snake face on the chair. He smiled. "Don't look at my dog heart and dog face. When I was in the present realm, I was still an idol." In the burning flames, the snake face that was almost turned into a skeleton opened its mouth in despair, but it couldn't make a sound. Only a vague whimper rose with the flames. "Don't panic. I understand your confusion and fear, but there's no need to be afraid. Soon, all of this will be over." Huaishur reached out and placed her hand on his face. Seemingly unintentionally, he suddenly asked, "By the way, have you heard of Bahamut?" At that moment, the snake face opened its mouth and roared in fear. Under Huaishur's fingers, the pair of pale eyes widened and peeked at the darkness that was rising behind him. And the ferocious silhouette in the darkness. It was grinning mockingly at him. The mouth of the devouring abyss opened and blew down the wind of despair. The darkness was like an ocean raging. In less than a minute, the ultimate that shrouded the temple disappeared. It didn't trigger any alarms, nor did it attract anyone's attention. When the darkness dissipated, among the wreckage, the sluggish snake-faced priest slowly raised his head. His eyes gradually regained their liveliness. When he looked at Huaishur, his eyes glowed with a fanatical light. Without hesitation, he knelt on the ground and bowed. "Holy Bahamut, you are the only true God. Only you are the eternal ruler." "Very good. Let's talk about other things next." Huaishur stroked his head. "Other than Zim, are there any other crown wearers in the city?" "There are 6 other crown wearers. Other than Lord Zim, there are 3 titanic crescent elders who are in hibernation in the molten demonic dragon tribe. There is a high-ranking frost worshipper in the thorn dragon tribe in the Frostbone settlement. There are also 2 frozen mummies. The snake-faced priest tirelessly mentioned all the important figures in the city without hiding anything. Lord Zim has the blessing of the false god Bushuen. He can summon the desire spirits under his command to fight for him. Other than that, he hides most of his power. He also has some kind of blessing that is equivalent to the reality realm's divine mark. In addition, he has an evil armor made from a large number of sacrifices. It is also at the level of a crown wearer, but its strength is definitely not the same. Huaishur suddenly understood. "Oh, so scheming. Is the greedy and lustful appearance also a disguise?" "No, this is real." The snake-faced priest replied doubtfully. "Is there a need to disguise this? In hell, being greedy and lustful was just a normal behavior. Even if the XP was a little strange, there was no need to disguise it. Speaking of disguises, it was the restraint of desire and holding the bottom line that was advocated by the reality realm that was truly worth disguising." Huaishur, who had fallen into the misunderstanding, was stunned. "No way. Aren't you guys being a little too arrogant these days?" Thinking about how he, as the guardian of the reality realm, had to grit his teeth every day to spend 648 XP, while you bastards could eat and drink every day. His fists were already hard. "Okay, no need to say more. Take me to the treasury." Huaishur covered his face with the mask prepared by Gregory. In an instant, he disguised himself as the Tauren warrior Maud. He pulled out the big sword from the opening in the ultimate in front of his chest and attached it to his waist again. After soaking in the ultimate and washing away the originally unorthodox curses, the entire blade was pitch black. Countless scarlet eyes could faintly be seen opening and closing, looking more and more evil. However, compared to the original appearance of a kobold, Maud's current appearance, although mighty, seemed to be lacking something. Even so, it was enough to fool others for the time being. Along the way, Huaishur followed behind the snake-faced priest with his head held high and went straight to the core. Just like Maud in the past, he was expressionless. He didn't even touch the buttocks of the passing heifers, but it made the heifers who had secretly hooked up with him in the past feel a little disappointed. And after Huaishur saw the other Taurens, his footsteps became faster and faster. Although he said that he had no conscience, in fact, he was still a little worried about Raymond. The faster he acted, the better. If he was late, what if his old brother lost his chastity? At the same time, behind the layers of hanging curtains, the spring scenery suddenly appeared. "Don't, my lord!" The Tauren laughed coquettishly, stalling for time. "Don't be so impatient." On the ridiculously large bed, a naked mountain of flesh covered his 4 eyes, laughing loudly as he played hide-and-seek with his beauty. "Come on, beauty, listen to me, and let me take a look." Zim excitedly tore off his blindfold. He couldn't wait any longer. Amidst the rolling waves of the mountain of flesh, a massive shadow covered the Tauren's pitiful, weak, and helpless face. Raymond's eyes flickered with tears as he frantically yelled through the origin form transmission. "Huaishur, save, save, save. Save, 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 save. Damn it, you're stalling for time. It hasn't even been 10 minutes. Huaishir said helplessly. If you don't know how to sing, why don't you dance? Give him something romantic. I'm so King romantic. Why have I been single for so many years? Raymond was indignant. You make so much sense that I have nothing to say in response. Then why don't you lie down, stick out your butt, and ask him to be gentler? What do you think caused all of this? Raymond habitually trembled with anger. His eyes were hazy with tears, but he still held onto a sliver of hope as he cast a flirtatious glance at the mountain of flesh. Give me something romantic, sir. Don't be so rough. How about, I'll dance for you. Dance? Zim was overjoyed. He clapped his hands furiously, full of anticipation. Good, good, good. Dance for me. Dance for me, beauty. Then Raymond remembered that he had been a King mercenary for the first half of his life and a King truck driver for the second half of his life. He was proficient in killing and arson, but he didn't know how to dance. However, he didn't want to go back on his words. What if he said that he didn't know how to dance, and this ugly bastard became enraged and forced himself on him? He could only rack his brain and think hard about whether or not he had any memories of dancing in the first half of his life. In the end, an exaggerated figure with exaggerated muscles suddenly appeared in his mind. Thus, a tear of integrity slowly slid down from the corner of the Tauren's eye. A minute later, the choked singing of Youngman began to play in the team's public channel. Chapter 10:24. Name. On the dusty steel door, a ferocious face looked down at the intruders and asked solemnly. Around the door, countless vicious traps and curses were already on the verge of being triggered. On the long corridor behind them, the eyes of the countless strange stone sculptures lit up in unison. Huaishir was stunned. What's going on? He turned around and asked the snake-faced priest, I'm already in hell. Why are you still using the same trick? Can't you come up with something new? This is the defense set up by the bastard Zim. The snake-faced priest replied devoutly, in addition to the puppet army outside, and the realm, the face on the door is the embodiment of the evil armor. In addition, there are many traps inside the treasury that I don't understand. Once triggered, it may directly trigger the alarm of the entire city, leading to, okay, I got it. Huaishir's scalp began to tingle. He looked up at the huge metal door in front of him and the strange face, and was at a loss for what to do. Since he wanted to do something, how could he not be mentally prepared at all? Moreover, what was that saying again? The strongest fortress was always breached from the inside. No matter how well Zim defended against the thieves outside the treasury, if the things in the treasury grew legs and ran out, there was nothing he could do, right? He brought the snake-faced priest out of the corridor again. This distance was enough for Huaishir to operate. There was no time to lose. In order to complete the plan quickly and protect his partner's precarious chastity, Huaishir felt that he was really worried sick. But listening to him sing so happily, it didn't seem like he was against it. Or was it that the long years of being single had distorted his sense of beauty? Even if he said he didn't want it, in fact, his heart was beating wildly, and he liked it. Thinking about it this way, it seemed it was not impossible. Huaishir's mind was in a mess. Then he put his hands together, and after praying that he was fine, he closed his eyes. After the heavy blockades, endless traps, and malice, in the dark secret room, the cabinet moved. It was as if some living creature had awakened. It let out a soft sound, and in an instant, countless vicious rays of light fell from the inside, detecting all unexpected changes, and the alarm was ready to go off. Huaishir's movements were slightly sluggish. He didn't expect that the internal defense wasn't left behind either. Then he laughed mockingly. He clenched his fists. Thus, in the darkness of the cabinet, The treasure that Russell had offered started to vibrate again. The crown that contained the true essence of the abyss and the dark aura faintly glowed. No matter who saw it, they would exclaim that it was a treasure. Unfortunately, this thing was just something that Weischer had casually molded out of 2 pieces of scrap metal. What truly gave off a mysterious aura was the bullet embedded in the base of the crown jewel, disaster extracted from Lu Baiyan's frozen soul. At this moment, the ink-like bullet was awakened by Great Siming's call. There were no thunderous rumbles or terrifying vibrations, but only a tiny sound that sounded like an illusion. Then, cracks that were so thin that they couldn't be seen appeared. The moment the outer shell was broken, the darkness that surged like an ocean seeped out bit by bit. Unlike Weischer's shadow burial and Yangsheng's 2 completely different origin substance transformations, the other great Siming did not have reflection crystals or blessings from true gods when they advanced. They didn't have an exaggerated qualitative change, like divinity qualitative change, light. On the contrary, they advanced on the basis of origin substance qualitative change, shadow, and formed pure darkness. Heaven's Inquisition Road was best at changing Hell's environment and reconstructing everything, relying on the control and manipulation of Hell's sediment and the true essence of the abyss. Therefore, this darkness origin substance that had been extracted over a long period of time was, to a certain extent, equivalent to the true essence of Hell that had yet to solidify. At this moment, the disaster forged from Lu Baiyan's frozen soul was completely awakened by Weischer. In an instant, formless darkness gushed out of the broken crown like a tide, penetrating all obstacles and radiating in all directions. Wherever it passed, all curses, realms, and defensive measures were silently engulfed, devoured, and even dissolved by the power of shadow burial. Assimilation. This incredibly terrifying corrosive force was like a strong acid extracted by a chemist falling on a substance. It targeted all disasters and curses and began to rapidly infiltrate and assimilate them. A single drop of ink was enough to dye the vast ocean with its own color. Everything turned pitch black. Contact, infiltration, corrosion, and assimilation. Everything was completed in the blink of an eye. Before the darkness that surged like a tidal wave, all traps and safeguards crumbled and melted into the darkness, becoming a part of it. In the end, the surging darkness rapidly shrunk into a blurry door, a road sign, outside the corridor. The Minotaur's body was rapidly collapsing and shrinking, thinning and evaporating until all that was left was an imperceptible shadow. Then, Weischer took a step forward. Shadow burial shuttle. Without triggering any alarms or traps, Weischer's vision blurred, and he found himself deep inside the treasury. The shelves were like a forest, extending in all directions. Outside the door, the snake-faced shaman could see. The face on the metal door was still sleeping, not reacting at all. Within the treasury, Weischer stretched out his hand, and the shadow origin substance that had formed the door rapidly shrank. After being molded by Yangsheng, it once again returned to the shape of a bullet. Thanks to shadow burial and Yangsheng's convenient innate talents, these cursed bullets could be reused at any time. In fact, the more disasters they assimilated, the more power they would become. While shooting, Su Chun could also feel the same sense of accomplishment as if he were holding a plate of walnuts. And now it was time to plunder even more delightfully. Weischer raised his head and looked around, his eyes illuminated by all kinds of shining treasures. They're all good stuff. Over the past thousands of years, all of the accumulated trade in White Thunder Plains, all of the treasures that Zim couldn't digest, had been piled up here by the lava demon dragon's innate nature. The crystallization of decay that would take thousands of years to brew in some desolate infernal realm had been piled up here on 2 shelves. To some negative stigmata, this was an invaluable resource that couldn't be bought with money. The only downside was that this kind of thing, if left in one place for too long, would affect the environment and increase its depth. Zim couldn't handle such a dangerous thing, so he had to let Su Chun handle it himself. Damn. Using an entire army of Infernal Realm as a sacrifice, after going through a secret ritual and merging bones, blood, and souls into cursed gray iron, an excellent material for forging high-tier relics and alchemy items, was piled up here like a mountain. If left alone for too long, these things could give birth to dangerous monsters like bloodthirsty demon spirits. Oh, there were already some, and there were more than 10 of them, all sealed in iron. Too dangerous. Take it, take it. Raymond was about to advance, so he could use it to torture him. A strange bone sword filled with the aura of death, as if it was calling his name. It was obviously not a good thing. Too dangerous. Take it, take it. Wait, there was a crystallization of blood hatred that was a head taller than him and weighed 2 to 3 tons, especially with such sharp edges. What if it cut his good friend Zim? Too dangerous. Take it. There was a whole box of flame jade that could transform a large group of flame elementals. This was too... Wait, this didn't seem dangerous, but who knows? What if it was spoiled in the future? Take it. Origin crystal. So ordinary, although there was a lot of them, at least a few 100,000. How could they be worthy of being a treasure trove? Take it. 16 skeletons, as large as mountains? They looked like they were carved out of iron and obsidian, emitting a ferocious aura. Who knew what kind of terrifying disaster was hidden inside? They were all the remains of the crowned lava demon dragon clan. Such a thing from the underworld. What if it scared the children? Take it. Maybe it would be useful when the Twilight Road's sublimator advanced. Just as he was plundering, Huaishur paused and suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why was it that most of the treasures he had plundered were related to celestial genealogy and could be used? Then he reacted sluggishly. Like all the good stuff in hell, even the heavenly kingdom's lineage can be used? Oh, it's not that there's a problem with the treasure trove. It's that celestial genealogy is too evil. Then it's fine. Behind Huaishur, the door to the ultimate was wide open. As he moved forward, shelves after shelves were swallowed and thrown into the bottomless darkness. The ultimate could even seal the remnants of destruction elements, so it was not a big problem to use it to decorate small things. The only pity was that although there were many good things in the treasure trove, none of them could be compared to his own origin form equipment and Beelzebub. The quality was a bit too trashy. From this, it could be seen that this Thunder White Plains was not very good. I wonder if the treasure troves of other rulers are better. I must take a look next time when I have the chance. Finally, there was an ancient sheepskin scroll sealed in the innermost part of the treasury. It was protected by dozens of seals and security measures. When Huaishur opened the box, she found that it was filled with promissory notes from various hells. It was completely useless. Trash. Tear it apart. In the end, even the illuminating pearls on the ceiling, the stone of Hades on the ground, and the embossments and inlaid gems on the walls were all taken down by Huaishur with the sword of virtue and stuffed into his trouser pocket. When Huaishur turned around and looked at the spotless and clean treasure trove, he could not help but smile proudly as a cleaner. He looked at the ground that was so shiny that it looked like it had been licked by dogs, the uneven walls that looked like they had been gnawed by dogs, and then at the wonderful space that allowed hundreds of dogs to run around freely. All of this was in exchange for his tireless and fearless efforts. Zim would definitely be very touched after receiving it, right? Unfortunately, Huaishur did not intend to stay here and accept the praise. The moment he took out the cursed bullet and threw it out, another cursed bullet was awakened on the street outside the palace. A door of shadow burial that led to the outside world opened again. Let's go, let's go. Huaishur looked back at the empty treasure trove behind him one last time and stepped toward the portal. Then his movements suddenly froze in place. Without any warning, an ancient mirror appeared in the void, reflecting his figure and freezing him for a moment. Huaishur instinctively wanted to struggle, but it was already too late. The door of shadow burial in front of him silently collapsed and shattered, replaced by a cold and ferocious face. Hades! Then, as the alchemist raised his hand, dozens of strange sharp blades appeared from the void and tore through Huaishur's body, nailing him to the ground. Blazing light emerged from the sharp blades and intertwined with each other to form a blade-like cage, shackling Huaishur within. God's mark, Tartaros. The power that the Greek gods once used to imprison the Titans in the abyss reappeared here, along with Hades's killing intent. When he was at his most relaxed and most defenseless, in an instant, he was severely injured. You think I'm going to leave just like that? After lying in wait for a long time, the jester who suddenly erupted reached out and pulled Huaishur's hair, lifting his face and questioning him expressionlessly. You think I can't do anything to you just because Zim is holding me back? In the tearing pain, Huaishur stared blankly at the face for a long time, unable to hide his confusion. Excuse me, who are you? A ferocious look appeared in Hades's eyes as he clenched his fists. In an instant, the intertwined blades glowed with blazing heat, destroying Huaishur's body from the inside out, causing him to scream involuntarily. I'm kidding, don't get agitated. Let's talk nicely. You're brewing a trick. Huaishur, I know you. Hades's palm did not relax at all, his eyes cold. This pain is not even a sneeze to you. You can say that. Huaishur screamed and begged, Please, friend. To be honest, I don't remember having such a big grudge between us. Why are you so obsessed with it? All I did was spoil your scheme, kill your good friend, destroy your mystic instrument of creation, and steal your car, didn't I? How big of a deal is that? There's a saying that goes, through all the tribulations, as long as your brother is there, you can forget about enmity with a smile. You have to look forward in everything. How about this? We'll split the things here equally. And you can spare my dog life. How about that? Huaishur sincerely begged. 70-30 is not impossible. 80-20 should be fine, right? You can't want 90-10, right? You have to leave me some. Enough! Hades roared, angrily interrupting him. He could no longer hide his anger and killing intent. This is your plan, Huaishur? Sneak into Iron Flame City and steal all his treasures, then slip away quietly? Do you think you can escape my blockade with such a trick? Dream on. You can't escape. Huaishur? He strengthened the miracle mark again and said coldly, I swear you will pay for what you've done. But at that moment, in the cage, Huaishur's face showed a strange smile. Let's not talk about the price for now. Hades. He probed curiously. But what if I don't want to escape? At that moment, Hades's expression froze. Outside the treasury, the snake-faced priest followed Huaishur's order and used all his strength to scream, shout, and roar. Guards, there's a thief! Then, an ear-piercing alarm burst out. In an instant, it resounded in every corner of Iron Flame City, waking up every pair of sleeping eyes from the darkness and looking at the deepest part of the palace. In the rapid rumbling and violent shaking, the dust on the vault of the treasury rustled down. It was as if a furious behemoth had smashed through the layers of obstacles and descended from the sky. Originally, I thought you could wait until I left the city before making a move. I didn't expect you to be so impatient, but it's not wrong. Huaishur looked at the trembling vault with a smile. Look, Hades, The master is coming to catch the thief. Are you ready to take the blame? Chapter 10:25. Inside the magnificent palace, behind the faintly translucent curtain, Zmeu's shouts and the laughter of the beauty echoed in the hot and dry air. How could there be such a torturous little fairy in this world? After the blood-pumping young man was finished, Zim's 4 eyes were almost burning red. Looking at the Tauren's firm muscles, strong body, and shy expression, he kept panting. "Beauty, come here, let me take a look." "No." The Tauren shook his head, shyly. "I'm scared." "Don't be scared. Let's do something happy together." Zim laughed wildly and could not hold it in anymore. He opened his arms, and the mountain of meat trembled as he pounced straight at Raymond. A huge shadow covered the Tauren's dull face, making him widen his eyes in despair and scream in fear, "Help! Beauty, no one will come to save you even if you scream yourself hoarse." Zim laughed strangely and tore off his clothes. He opened his mouth with saliva dripping down, revealing his sharp teeth. "I want to eat hot," just as Raymond gritted his teeth and was about to activate his battle form and pull out the power dual swords on his arms to fight Zim. He saw Zim's movements suddenly stop. The originally greedy face quickly stiffened, and in the end, it turned into an uncontrollable rage. The moment the ear-piercing alarm sounded, the huge mountain of meat in front of Raymond started to squirm as if it was boiling. Then, the disguise of the meat was torn apart, and a lava demonic dragon that was hundreds of meters long crawled out. Countless compound eyes emitted red light, and its thick body was covered with sharp edges and scales. Raymond subconsciously covered his, but without waiting for him to scream, Zmeu actually left the rare beauty on the spot. His sturdy torso smashed downwards, and after burrowing through the ground, he charged straight towards his own treasure vault. The angry roar echoed in Iron Flame City along with the alarm, causing the ground to tremble. Soon, the ceiling of the treasury shattered. A huge mouthpart pierced out, and the ferocious compound eyes opened. He saw the abyss jester standing in the treasury. "Hades!" Zim was stunned for a moment. He didn't understand what was going on, but when he saw his treasure trove that was cleaner than a dog's licking, he couldn't help but let out a mournful scream. "My treasure! My treasure!" It wasn't just the treasures that he had accumulated over a long period of time. His next year's pay, his collection, and even the bones that were preserved there had disappeared without a trace. My father, grandfather, grandmother, and great-grandfather. This time, it was truly as if his parents had died. "Wow, you're so wicked. In the cage." Weisher lamented in astonishment. "Why do you even want to dig up other people's ancestral graves?" Hades looked at him coldly. Before he could say anything, Zim finally saw the pile of parchment scraps in the corner of the treasury. There were also the decrees and signatures that had long since dimmed, the debts and orders from hundreds of hells, as well as the loss of weapons and equipment that were enough to arm thousands of hells. It was as if hundreds of sharp blades had pierced his heart in an instant. Zim screamed as if he was about to cry blood. Countless scarlet compound eyes were about to shed tears of blood. "Hades, I want you dead." The lava demonic dragon roared, and the door of the treasury shook violently. The metal face flew out of thin air and covered the dragon's face. In an instant, the gigantic creature that was hundreds of meters long was covered in a layer of metallic light. On the ferocious body, countless strange runes appeared and circled around it, forming many strange faces. They kept making expressions that were either crying or laughing, but at this moment, the eyes on each face were filled with rage. "You're dead. Hades, you're dead." Zim screamed and pounced on Hades. "No one in the world can save you. I want you dead." A dark, purple glow appeared all over his body and turned into indestructible sharp claws that pierced toward the abyss jester. Hades's expression suddenly changed. He used all his strength to hold up the secret device. He even had to mobilize part of the infernal prison's power to block, in front of him. With a loud bang, the entire treasury and half of the palace exploded out of thin air. Hades flew up, stepped on the cage, and roared at Zim, "Idiot, calm down. Don't you understand? This is Huaishur's scheme. It's Huaishur who stole everything from your treasury, not me." As he spoke, he blocked the blade cage in front of him and showed Zim, the prisoner inside. "Look carefully." Zim's movements paused for a moment. He looked at the man in the cage, who revealed his true face under Hades' suppression. Yes, it's me. I'm Huaishur." The prisoner in the cage nodded crazily like a dog-headed man whose toes had been stepped on. Tears and snot flowed out of his nose. He was afraid that Zim wouldn't believe him, so he cried in fear, "Don't kill me. Woo-woo, I'm Huaishur." But for some reason, snake-like scales vaguely appeared under his face. An aura that Zim was very familiar with came from inside, causing the molten demonic dragon's face to twitch violently. "Hades, I'll F***ck your," Zim roared. "That's my sacrifice." Without any hesitation, the ruler of Iron Flame's city roared at the sky. The volcano behind him shook violently, and countless giant worms emerged from it. In the city, there were also countless strange figures slowly rising up. On the city wall, the Arrow Tower shook violently. Black ballistas rose from it. The ballistas were full of malice and curses, shining with a cold light. Now that things had come to this, how could Zimu not understand? Huaishur, where the F***ck is this Huaishur? It was all that be **starred, Hades' excuse. It was all his scheme to steal his treasures. Kill him for me. Following Zim's order, a rain of arrows covered the sky and covered the earth. The terrifying scale and the cursed iron arrows mixed in it made Hades's expression change. He quickly rose into the air and activated many secret techniques. He barely managed to block the large group of arrows that had transformed into a large number of arrows. He crushed them and roared furiously. "Zim, you idiot! Think about it carefully. Would I be stupid enough to steal from your treasure vault and be discovered by you?" He suppressed his anger and asked hoarsely, "If I wanted the White Thunder Plains, why didn't I mobilize an army to besiege you and force you to be enslaved? Not to mention that Iron Flame City is unobstructed. Even if I wanted to make a move, wouldn't I know how to seal the area?" His words of grief and indignation caused everyone to be stunned. After all, what he said seemed to make a lot of sense and was very convincing. But before he finished, he heard Huaishur whistling innocently in the cage. Then the earth rumbled just outside Iron Flame City. In the body of the hidden red dragon, the window rolled down. Forster stuck his head out and opened the pages of Les Miserables in his hand. Then, in the sky, a lone star fell like a tear. The large group that Khandra had recorded in the event records reappeared here. Above the deep cracks in the earth, countless strange eyes appeared out of thin air and shrouded Iron Flame City. In an instant, the threshold of 10,000 eyes rose from the ground and connected to the sky, covering everything. Seal the inside and outside. Dead silence. In the dead silence, everyone looked at Hades in a daze. It was as if they saw Lai Fu beating Tsun Takashi the moment they entered. They were stunned. Hades was also stunned. Only in the cage, Huaishur stuck his head out and asked curiously, "Didn't you not seal the area? Did you change your mind?" Hades gritted his teeth, and his expression twitched. He angrily contracted the seal. Countless sharp blades wandered inside Huaishur's body, causing severe injuries. Immediately after, countless furious roars could be heard. Iron Flame City shook. Zim had already risen into the air, and there were dozens of strange shadows behind him. The powerhouses of Iron Flame City understood everything in an instant. Without any hesitation, they killed him. For a moment, the entire sky seemed to be ignited by a raging fire and was burned to ashes by the spitting lava. The secret instruments around Hades's body trembled rapidly and shattered layer by layer. Even the relics at the border started to crack. The shadow of a sturdy city rose from the miraculous engraving, and then quickly collapsed. Boom. Damn it! Hades turned around and roared at Huaishur, "What are you trying to do?" "I just wanted to go out for a tour. Suddenly being chased by someone, I can't do anything about it." Huaishur tilted his head innocently at Hades and winked. After all, what kind of bad intentions can a dog hook have? How could it not have bad intentions? Dog hooks are all bad intentions. But there was no time to talk nonsense with him, because in midair, Zim, who was covered by the evil armor, roared loudly. Bushuan's bright light shrouded him and turned everything into a strange pink and disgusting dark purple. Countless corrupted souls rose from the evil armor and turned into dazzling light that broke through the air. They penetrated Hades's shield layer by layer and tore his body apart. Immediately, the Abyss Jester was reborn again. An abnormal blush appeared on his pale face. He had been infected by Bushuan's curse. If he had not been transformed into a pseudo-soul, he would have gone berserk by now. However, under the siege, he had no other choice. "You forced me to do this." Hades squeezed the words out from between his teeth. In the soul box at his waist, the remnant souls formed by the alchemists on Helios flew out. Under his command, they quickly unfolded countless secret rituals. Finally, they overlapped and evolved into a divine mark that inherited the Chaos era. It formed a flag that fluttered in the wind. Then, flashes of light descended from the sky. The army hidden outside the thunder-white plains broke through the air and arrived. The leader was a steel monster as huge as a mountain. After mechanical transformation, the withering mountain opened its mouth and spat out blazing flames. The flames swept across the ground, and a terrifying explosion spread in an instant. Thousands of hands grabbed at the opponent that flew over. "How dare you say you have no conspiracy?" Zemu's eyes turned scarlet as it roared furiously. The volcano in Iron Flame City erupted with a furious roar. Those lava demonic dragons that were soaked in lava and raging fire crawled out from the deep underground and hungrily tore apart the body of Withered Mountain. Countless cannons were pushed out from the positions on the city wall and fired. The war came out of nowhere and swallowed everything. Roars came one after another. Blood spilled like rain. Earth-shattering changes kept bursting out. But under the protection of the cage, Huaishur was unscathed except for being shackled by sharp blades. At this moment, in the leisurely cage, he smelled the blood in the wind and praised from the bottom of his heart. "Get better." Chapter 10:26. After bidding farewell to the dullness of the past, the thunder-white plains welcomed turbulence amidst the rumbling. In the Iron Flame City shrouded by the threshold of 10,000 eyes, the mechanized, withering mountain roared at the sky. Black grease spurted out from its mouth and nose. When it landed in the air, it ignited clusters of green flames. Wherever the flames spread, the burly minotaurs on the city walls screamed in pain. They struggled to move their limbs and fell from the city wall. They burned into ashes in the air and scattered with the wind. They disappeared. The volcano was enraged. Amidst the large group, the two crowned stone lava demonic dragons furiously attacked. One of them extended out from the volcano, wrapped in a vast and majestic red light, and rampaged through the attacking army, spreading death everywhere. Meanwhile, a worm covered in pustules was wrapped around the body of the mountain of withering death, spitting out poison and pestilence. Those activated germs could even corrode steel, rapidly causing huge pustules to grow on the metallized bodies. The withering mountain roared in pain. The furnace was overloaded. It spat out dragon-like flames from its mouth and swept past the demonic dragon. However, it was useless. In the pain that was enough to make one's soul collapse, the withering mountain's terrifying body suddenly turned around. Several of its hands grabbed the demonic dragon that was spreading plague on its back. It pulled with all its might and peeled off a large piece of its iron shell. It grabbed the huge demonic dragon in its hands and twisted it angrily. It squeezed out a large amount of dirty blood as if it was a rag. However, the crown-wearing stone lava demonic dragon immediately broke into 2, then 4, then 8. In the end, it crawled into the withering mountain's body like countless maggots. The mountain-like steel monster roared and raised the temperature of its furnace core endlessly. Even if its shell and skeleton were about to be melted, a large number of worms crawled out in a sorry state and turned back into a shrunken version of a huge worm. The huge monster rolled, trampled, and slapped with its palms. 1/3 of the huge Iron Flame city collapsed in an instant. However, there were still large groups of worms crawling out from everywhere. There were even more worms called demonic dragons. Just as the mountain of death relaxed, dozens of stone lava demonic dragons crawled out from the cracks in the earth's crust and entangled his body. They had dozens of huge arms, legs, and even deformed bodies. After the volcano collapsed, countless lava gushed out like an ocean, splashing onto its huge body. Under the entanglement of the lava dragons, the withering mountain was dragged to the ground. Like a prisoner whose limbs and neck were being dragged by ropes and horses, the withering mountain struggled with all its might, raising layers of lava ripples. Beside the spreading lava, there were even more large groups charging into the city without any regard for their own safety, clashing with the iron wall of the Minotaur's warriors. If one were to look down from the sky, the line of defense that connected with each other seemed to have become an ambiguous and strange big mouth. It was constantly squirming, using steel as its teeth to chew on flesh and bones, spilling out blood and corpses. It was even more dangerous in the sky. Under the leadership of Zim, the rest of the crowns surrounded Hades in the sky and attacked him ferociously. Zim, who was wearing the evil creature's armor, expanded endlessly. His huge mouth kept spitting out vicious light that was filled with Bushuan's blessings and insane curses. The air had become terrifyingly cold under the wings of the thorned dragon frost devotee, which was even colder than liquid ammonia. Countless rising blood mist condensed into a strange scarlet frost in the air, once again leading the cold mist to fall to the ground. Wherever the frost fell, countless sharp icicles would shoot out rapidly like giant frost trees, freezing all living things within 100 meters into ice sculptures. At the back, there were 2 deformed mummies that were wrapped in tattered bandages, watching coldly. Sticky corpse fluid was seeping out from under their bandages, dripping into the air and disappearing as if it had fallen into another world. At this moment, the eternal clouds that hovered above the white thunder plains had turned completely dark. No lightning could be seen. Only the mournful roars of countless skeletons and spirits could be heard in the darkness. Under the mummy's gaze, deformed hands reached out from the clouds one after another, grabbing at Hades' location. No matter how mysterious and complicated the secret apparatus was, under the pull of the pitch-black hands, it would quickly fall apart. 4 against 1, it should have been a sure win. But at this moment, it felt like Hades was suppressing them all by himself. whether it was the disaster of blood that had befallen the Nile River in the past, or the divine mark that could summon lightning to annihilate all sinners, or the clones and all sorts of strange secret rituals that were like witchcraft. Now, in Hades' hands, all of them were like tamed pets that could be summoned and sent away at will. The former first seed of Helios did not weaken after turning himself into a spirit. Instead, due to the transformation brought about by the solidification of his body, he became closer to the essence of the abyss. To a certain extent, he was the amalgamation of all the alchemists that Helios had thrown into the abyss. He himself was the product of alchemy, a living mystic instrument, a living mark of miracles. Even if he did not have the terrifying power of a grandmaster who could turn the impossible into the possible as long as he was well prepared, he was not afraid of anyone's challenge. Who knew how many resources he had obtained from the King of Wither's subordinates during his time in Bator. At this moment, in just an instant, the Hedi who appeared in the mirror's reflection had already brazenly reached out her hand and pressed it against one of the mummy's faces. In an instant, the mummy began to convulse violently and rapidly collapsed inward. Amidst the mournful screams, it was covered in amber fluid and finally solidified into a fist-sized crystal that emitted a gloomy aura. With a flip of his hand, the orb condensed by the wearer of the crown was inserted into the Mark of Miracles, becoming an offering to the fallen gods. A torrent of tsunamis appeared out of thin air and surged through the air, sweeping the frost devotee back to the eternal abyss of the sea. In the brief silence, Hades wiped the blood off his face and laughed hoarsely. "You bunch of trash want to be my enemy?" As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of black light appeared from behind the cracked palace in the distance. Just a few seconds ago, under the blood sacrifice of countless slaves in the palace, a giant bone arrow had been stained with scarlet, as if it was a treasure carved out of crystal. The moment it was unsealed, countless illusions and high-pitched screams from different skeletal hells appeared in the palace. Painful deaths and distorted lives, momentary joy and eternal pain. With Bushuan's blessing, the arrow had turned into a crystal of despair and was aimed at Hades in the sky. Seizing the moment when he paused, the arrow silently flew out from the ballista. It crossed a long distance without any warning. Countless strange rays of light intertwined into pure darkness, tearing through layers of defenses and pouring into Hades' body. A large hole was violently dug in the jester's chest. Then, endless desires from the demonic wisdom surged out from the simulated soul, pushing him to the brink of collapse. But what followed after his scream was Zmu's miserable screams. After the arrow pierced through Hades, it went straight into Zim's huge body. The overly pure and violent desire instantly crushed the armor of evil's mind, causing the armor that had experienced countless battles to quickly soften and turn into pitch-black sludge. As for Zemu, he wasn't any better. In the spreading pink light, countless graceful figures appeared and coiled around Zim. They opened their red lips and kissed his huge body, then violently devoured his life force. What's going on? Damn it, why did they fire? Below the palace, the commander who fired the arrow trembled as he felt the anger from his master. He turned around and roared, "Who told you to fire?" Who? When he turned around, a chill ran down his spine, causing him to freeze on the spot. Behind him, on the faces that were gradually becoming sluggish, sticky saliva dripped from the corners of their crooked mouths. Soon, a fanatical and blissful smile appeared on their faces as they murmured, "Holy, holy, praise the eternal ruler. Praise the end of all things, praise Bahamut." Amidst their pious praises, scarlet eyes appeared from the outline of the flying birds and looked at him greedily. The darkness was like a tide, swallowing him within. Soon, the commander also joined in the frenzied crowd. Faith. At this moment, the plague known as faith was spreading throughout the underworld. Frost devotee screeched, When Hades suddenly became seriously injured, the other crowns began to attack him without regard for the consequences. If they let him succeed, then they would be branded with the withered king's mark and become his slaves in an eternal war. Very quickly, however, Hades broke free from the origin substance. As if he were cutting off rotten flesh from a wound, he unhesitatingly cut off half of himself, which had fallen into madness, and refined it into a pink crystal, sealing Bushuan's curse within. Even though he was seriously injured, his combat strength hadn't decreased in the slightest. His pale face was now filled with savagery. He only needed to think for a moment to understand what this strange attack was all about. He gazed coldly at Huaishur. This was your plan? Instigating conflict and reaping the fruits of others' labor? Do you think that's enough to kill me? Even in the midst of the most intense battle, he maintained the sturdiness of the prison without relaxing in the slightest. As long as there was even the slightest gap, there would be no way to stop shadow burial from appearing. He had also experienced Huaishur's vitality a long time ago. Even a single cell of his would be able to grow back into a scourge. Any curses below the level of a ruler wouldn't be effective against him. And the poison and plague were nourishing him. He was more like a creature of hell than any other creature of hell. Compared to the ascended ones, he was more like a demon born from hell. Even though he had been imprisoned and suppressed by hell's prison, and was constantly being torn apart by the blade of judgment, he was still able to speak and breathe. He was just short of singing a song. Don't think that you can escape just like that. Why, sure. Hades squeezed the words out from between his teeth, his eyes vicious. I've reserved the best place for you in the withered king's dungeon. I promise that once this is over, we'll be together for a very, very long time. In the prison, Huaishur only lowered his eyes and smiled as he looked down at all of this. It was as if he was watching children play games in a kindergarten, calm and peaceful. There was no change in his expression. Hades, what are you afraid of? The prisoner asked curiously. Am I not your prisoner? You can do whatever you want of me at any time, control my life and death. What are you afraid of? You should be more lenient to an old friend. Friend. Hades laughed, but there was no joy in it. It was as cold as the cry of an owl. That's right, a friend. Huaishur nodded, as if they had met under the moon. He sighed softly. When old friends meet again, we should have a drink. At that moment, a chill suddenly appeared in Hades' heart. In the prison, Huaishur was still smiling, but that gentle facade had finally been torn apart. What was revealed was endless darkness, malevolence, and malevolence just like the abyss itself. At that moment, the smiling man asked curiously, By the way, do you like to drink? Along with his words, the city that was originally filled with chaos and strangeness welcomed an instant of deathly silence. Chapter 10:27. It was as if all sound had been swallowed up. In this short moment of silence, countless plants grew in the chaotic city. Poisonous plants and evil flowers from countless hells quickly took root and sprouted under the watering of blood and struggle. Beautiful colors spread in all directions. In an instant, the entire city was decorated into a wondrous fairyland. But what was hidden under the flowers and leaves were only bones. What supported the foundation of the fairyland was death. In this short moment of silence, Huaishur sighed softly. You might not know this, but previously, out of interest, I taught myself a little bartending. Although I haven't reached the level of a professional bartender, it's actually not that difficult. He sniffed the wind filled with the smell of blood and said slowly, First, you have to find a few bottles of good wine. The more the better. Don't worry about wasting it. It's best if you can find a big barrel that is big enough to drink. In the city, the door of the forging workshop opened with a bang, illuminating the eyes of countless large groups. At the source of the endless production lines, the mountain-like eternal furnace surged above the raging fire. Inside the huge furnace that was hundreds of meters tall, countless molten steel surged inside, glowing with a dazzling red and silver glow. It was like a volcano made of steel. It illuminated the pairs of blood-red eyes. Holy! 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 The large groups of people who had devoted themselves to fanaticism raised their hands and shouted excitedly. Then Huaisher ordered, "In order to ensure the taste, you have to put enough ice into the bucket first." Carriages of source crystals and abyssal precipitate from the warehouse, and even countless cursed stones were running on the rails. Together with the huge carriages, they fell into the molten steel that surged like a lake. Very quickly, it disappeared from sight. Only the molten steel that was filled with calamity and soul crystals gradually glowed with a strange light. Next, it's like stewing soup. Huaisher said, "Add the base wine and the main ingredients." Among the large groups, the afterimages of great Ming slowly walked out one after another. They looked down at the boiling molten steel and revealed the same crazy smile. From the cliff of the orbit, he spread his arms and leaped into the febrile wind that was blowing at his face. Very quickly, they were silently swallowed by the viscous molten steel. Following that, ink-like black dots slowly emerged from the molten steel and spread out, revealing an abyss-like gloomy color. The projection of the ultimate appeared, and countless curses flowed out from the opened door. Endless calamities surged from the darkness. Remember to stir it well. Huaisher reminded, "It makes the taste of the wine pure and distinct." Thus, an invisible force surged, causing the surging and boiling molten steel to change and rotate. Within the violently shaking furnace, the molten steel stirred and formed a vortex that gradually became clear. From the darkness at the core of the vortex, the high-pitched screeches of iron rubbing against stone burst out. Endless malice and curses were grinding against each other, intensifying and transforming into even more hideous forms. A huge shadow emerged from the deepest part of the molten steel, stretching its silhouette like a giant whale swimming in the sea. It was constantly changing. It was like an angry giant bull, a galloping white horse, a giant deer with a crown on its head, a coiled black-scaled serpent, and a rock that filled the world. In the end, everything was hidden in the darkness again. Then, according to your personal taste, feel free to add a little lemon, a little pepper, and a little salt, just on both sides of the furnace. A large group of collective fanatical praises, spreading their arms. Countless iron crows fluttered in the air, bringing the curse vessel carefully prepared by Gregory, the materials stored in the Red Dragon's warehouse, and even Forster's personal collection over the years. Finally, there were also the huge skeletons that had fallen from the ultimate. Everything quickly melted in the iron light. It disappeared. Only the terrifying calamities brewing in the furnace's core were more ferocious and violent. The sound of boiling bubbles bursting turned into a thunderous roar that shook the entire world. It tore through the dome, rushed into the sky, and echoed violently in everyone's ears. Both sides couldn't help but change their expressions. Before serving it to the table, you need to tidy up the table again, light the incense, adjust the lights, and put all your worries aside. In the midst of the sharp blades, Huaisher leisurely concluded, "Remember, a sufficient sense of ritual is the best way to enjoy life." The magnetic, low voice echoed in everyone's ears, like a yoga instructor and a psychiatrist, calming all the restlessness and annoyance in people's hearts, allowing the soul to return to tranquility. But at this moment, the seeds of confusion and panic were planted, making people shudder as they looked down at the sudden changes in the city under their feet. In the collapsed Iron Flame City, The sound of bubbles bursting could be heard on the factory's assembly line, around the furnace, in the palace, in the prison, and even on the city wall. Under the activation of Great Si Ming's divine mark, all the believers shrouded in the plague were like lambs on the altar, ushering in the final sacrifice and dedication. They melted under the fire and were buried in the shadows. Their bodies, consciousnesses, and souls were rapidly collapsing under the catalysis of the curse and the plague, turning into chaotic and murky shadows that flowed all over the place. Under the guidance of the Sea of Flowers, they quickly outlined the outline of a huge secret array. Everything was shrouded in this alchemy array. The final stage was laid, and what burst out from it was a terrifying premonition that would make every living being tremble. It was as if death was close at hand, standing on this gorgeous stage, looking back at the audience with a ferocious smile. In the blink of an eye, everything became completely different. "Stop him!" The crippled Zmu screamed miserably as he urged his broken and rotting body on without any regard for his own safety. After tearing apart Hetty's barrier, he actually abandoned his enemy and used all his strength to gnaw away at the outer shell of Hell's prison. But the prison was too sturdy. It was a seal that was specially made for Huaishur, completely restraining all of Great Si Ming's divinity and power, ensuring that his soul would be trapped inside and unable to break free. But it was already too late. "It's too late. Run!" Frost Devotee spread its wings and swept up a large number of its children, trying to distance itself. It wasn't the only one. In the city, in the lava of the volcano, hundreds of stone lava demonic dragons, and countless others on the battlefield, all of them were running for their lives, trying to get as far away from the terrifying danger as possible. But outside the battlefield, the crippled threshold of 10,000 eyes was still holding fast to its mission. Even though most of its eyes had dimmed and shattered under the aftermath of the battle, there were still a large number of dull eyes that kept flickering. From the deepest part of the earth to the sky, everything was sealed. There was no escape. The crowned wearers screamed in despair and threw themselves forward, wanting to perish together with the damned abyss jester. "Stop now! Now!" Hades roared ferociously and clenched his fist. Countless sharp blades pierced through and multiplied, almost tearing Huaishur into pieces. But inside the prison, Huaishur was still smiling as he knocked on the indestructible prison in front of him. From the very beginning, none of this had been under his control. What he had set up was simply a command that could not be stopped once it was activated. "Now, your wine is ready, sir." Just like any other bartender, he smiled reservedly at the customer behind the bar. He raised his shattered hand and snapped his fingers. "Finally, all that's left is to light a match." Clap! With a soft sound, the invisible match ignited the alcohol in the cup, causing it to glow with a resplendent light. At that moment, the forging began. Vast amounts of origin substance flowed through the array and the secret apparatus, gathering towards the terrifying furnace at the very center. Amidst the endless flashes of light, the King of Forging's inheritance was activated. A large number of missions were instantly separated into individual units. Then, the origin substance and the secret apparatus were activated, pushing forward tens of thousands of individual missions at the same time. In the end, they were all completed at the same time. The 10,000 tons of disaster steel underwent a transformation, as if countless grains of dust had been refined into crystals. Ashen sublimation. What was formed and refined with a large amount of resources was a metal bomb that had undergone 6 upgrades and 12 additions and repairs. Its scale was unprecedented, and its yield was immeasurable. At the same time, its destructive power was unimaginable, and even Huaishur could not imagine. At least this time, It was finally comparable to the fury of the legendary demigod Pharaoh Ramses II, right? But no one would exclaim at such an outstanding creation, an exquisite forging anymore. Everyone, including Hades, used their fastest speed to get away from the furnace that was glowing with a strange light. Only Huaishur, who was left behind in the prison, propped up his chin and curiously observed the gradually emerging and spreading light. At that moment, all was silent. The world was pitch black. Darkness, 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 darkness. In the sudden darkness, an unprecedented light spewed out. In the horrifying silence that had never been experienced before, a loud rumble that sounded like the end of the world was brewing. In a short time that could not be described with a snap of a finger, the furnace rapidly expanded under the blazing flames. After expanding to an exaggerated size, like a plastic film that was torn apart, it simply festered and shriveled into a wisp of insignificant dust. What replaced it was the light that surged within. Light descended upon hell, looking down from the sky. Amidst the countless dazzling flames that shot out like needles, there was only a small bubble that was rapidly expanding, brimming with bright red. It danced in every eye, quickly and clumsily spreading in all directions, until the pale airwaves rose from the ground. The mournful waves surged and swept, turning into a tidal wave that soared into the sky and rushed in all directions. Wherever the scorching febrile wind swept across, everything would quickly stiffen and wither. Before the fiery light arrived, everything would quickly peel off and wither into fine dust, just like the tide that came and went. And just like that, a magnificent flower jumped out of the bright red bubble that had expanded to the limit and suddenly burst, appearing in front of everyone's eyes. It displayed this fleeting posture enchanting. The light was like a tide, swallowing everything. The dazzling light even made Hades, who was galloping, feel that it had pierced through his skull and pierced through his body before being projected on his eyes. It was so clear. Even if he faced it with his back facing it, he could not escape from its wonderful figure. However, in the surging airwaves, he saw a flying iron crow flying out from the center like a cannonball. It rode the febrile wind and overtook the iron crow. It flipped nimbly in the waves of self-destruction. It crossed its short legs and took out a small pair of sunglasses from under its wings. It placed them on its beak and observed the blazing light that was chasing closely behind it. It was like surfing, letting out a fresh and exciting cry. Woo, woo. Damn it, it's crazy. This was the last thought in Hades' mind. There was no way to know if he had cursed out any undignified words in that instant, because the light had swallowed everything. At that moment, everyone turned into light. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.